Hi, everybody. Welcome to our coverage of the Green Party's leadership race. I'm Vashi Kapelos, and I am in studio here in CBC, in our Parliamentary Bureau here in Ottawa. We have a very exciting night ahead, I think. Very exciting as far as Saturday nights during a pandemic are concerned. I want to give you a little bit of a lay of the land, what you can expect. I'll bring up, first of all, the sheer number of candidates. We are expecting by the end of tonight, over the course of the next few hours, in fact, that somebody will emerge the winner and they will be stepping out to that podium. That is the Ottawa Art Gallery. Thank you. The Ottawa Art Gallery, where tonight's events are taking place. We're going to hear from Elizabeth May, who, of course, resigned back in November of 2019, starting this whole leadership race off, which, of course, nobody anticipated would be happening through a pandemic, but ended up. And this is actually the first leadership race since 2006. So it's a really big deal for the Green Party. There was a ton of enthusiasm from the membership. It, in fact, I'm told, nearly doubled in the lead up to this vote. So this is a big night for the party, and we're looking forward to taking you through. To help me do that, look how wonderfully they just came up there. There is David Thurton, my colleague, who will be on location at the Ottawa Art Gallery, and next to him, CBC's polls analyst Eric Grenier, who accompanied me on our first experiment doing this a few years ago for the by-election for the NDP by-election, for which Jagmeet Singh won, the leader of the party. Tonight we are actually going to be, before I get to my colleagues, I just want to remind you that we're going to be taking your questions throughout the night, and they will be fielding them with their expertise. David has been covering the race for the Greens throughout this whole thing. I've received a bunch of them already on Instagram, so keep them coming. I think we're on every possible arm of the internet right now: YouTube, GEM, CBC News.ca, et cetera, et cetera. So please forward in your questions on all those avenues, and we'll try to get through as many as possible. We're kind of going to take you from here into the room for the various speeches. Elizabeth May will give a speech, the winning candidate will give a speech, the party president will give a speech. So we're going to take you kind of in and out so you get a sense of the whole evening. But I'll bring back my colleagues first, and I'll start with you, David. Tell me a bit about, we talked about how the leadership race was taking place through the pandemic. Tonight is also happening in the middle of the pandemic. How has that affected the kind of vibe there?
Well, you know what? This leadership race started in February. You know, COVID-19 was a thing, but it wasn't a pandemic then. So the plan was that, you know, Greens would be meeting in PEI in Charlottetown. They'd be having a big convention where they'd be talking about policy, the future of the party, and electing a leader that people would actually be filling out their ballots in person. Well, that all blew up when this pandemic came along. The whole leadership race had to change. There was even some talk about possibly, you know, pushing it and kicking it down, you know, later on in the year. But of course, we are in a minority parliament situation, so we could be going into election anytime, Vashi. And so you need political parties to be ready. So they stuck with it. The whole campaign took on this whole virtual format thing, which a lot of Canadians are used to. We're all working virtually, we're all working from home. And so, yeah, it's totally different. So, you know, we're here in Ottawa, not in Charlottetown. There's not a lot of people here on location. You know, we're not actually in the room. We're on a terrace. There's a beautiful view of the Westin, I think, behind me, and maybe you can see Parliament Hill. I don't know what you can see. But yeah, things have changed dramatically because of COVID-19.
Eric, we got this really good question, I thought, on Instagram that sort of lends itself to things that I was interested in asking you about. How significant is this for the party? And can it impact how well the Greens do in the next election? What are your expectations for tonight? Like, how significant is this for them?
Well, it is a big deal for them. It's a new leader. It's the first leader they will have had since 2006. That's a long time to have the same leader in place. And the Green Party could use a bit of a renewal right now. With Elizabeth May having been the leader for so long, the Greens kind of need something new now, because with COVID-19 really pushing the environment off the agenda, a lot of Canadians are now concerned about the pandemic, and then they're concerned about how we're going to come out of it, the economic recovery. So the environment's really not getting a lot of attention right now, and so the new leader of the Green Party needs to be someone who's going to be able to get that attention and get people to think about the Green Party. Because if you just look at what happened in New Brunswick, a minority government there, the Greens had been an important part of creating that minority government. And Blaine Higgs, the PC leader, brought the province into an election campaign and was able to win a majority government. The Greens weren't really able to make any headway. And now we're seeing in British Columbia the same thing. The Greens were propping up John Horgan's NDP government there. Now the polls are suggesting that Horgan's likely to get a majority government, and the Greens are fighting just to hold on to their seats because people right now have other concerns other than the environment. So that's a challenge for the next leader. That's a big one. That's a big challenge.
It's a big challenge, David, but let's go over some of, I guess, what the various candidates stand for and who have emerged as the front runners. There seems to be a bit of a split between some of the candidates, right? They're kind of classified some as more moderate than others. You've talked about this week when you profiled them. Some are more, quote unquote, eco-socialist. All of them support a universal basic income. Many of them, all of them support stronger action on climate change. But it depends kind of on who you're talking to. There are some nuances, obviously, on that part of the file as well.
Yeah, well, first of all, can we just talk about how many candidates are in this race?
There's a lot.
8 candidates, which,
There they are.
Yeah, I don't know, Eric could probably, confirm this, but that's a lot to be on a ballot. That's a lot for, the almost 35,000 Greens who have to make a decision tonight on who is going to be the next leader of that party. And the candidates are different in their own ways. I think you hit the nail on the head. The main story throughout this campaign and the main narrative has been, what is going to be the future of the Green Party? Is it going to be the party of Elizabeth May, the party where Elizabeth May left it, and it's just going to try and get more seats in the House of Commons, try and become an official party instead of just holding 1 or 3 seats? Or is it going to move further to this is my right, to the left of Canadian politics? And adopt these eco-socialist ideals and values. And I know that's probably a new term for a lot of Canadians, but basically, what is an eco-socialist? A good way to describe it is you think of a watermelon. A watermelon, if you were to cut a slice of it, you would have the green outside, the green rind, which, would represent the environment, and inside would be red, which would represent the people. So this philosophy of eco-socialism is basically, we want to be a political party that cares about the environment and cares about people. So, taxing the wealthy, maybe bringing in an income cap, as you said, a basic income or a guaranteed livable income or whatever you want to call it. Something that protects the people, that makes sure that the people are taken care of. At the same time, we're taking care of the environment. And that has been a major discussion, Vashi, in this election. What is the future of the Green Party? Is it going to remain centrist or further to the left? This is my left. Yeah.
And Eric, you were flagging. I saw David Coletto with Abacus had an interesting set of tweets on some of the research that they've done about who, if we're talking about the future direction of the party, where are their voters? Where are their voters now, and where are the potential voters that they can draw from, or the voter base that they can draw from? And what did he find, and what have you seen in your research as well?
Yeah, with the survey that Dave Coletto of Abacus put out, it found that 34% of Canadians would consider voting for the Green Party, which is a lot, but it's a lot less than the other parties. And a lot of those people do come from the left. So certainly a shift to the right would not get the Greens very much. There's very few people who, say, for example, have the Green Party as their second choice if the Conservatives are their first choice. So that means they are going after Liberal voters, NDP voters, and in Quebec, Bloc Québécois voters, and predominantly younger voters. They have a lot more support, and a lot more younger Canadians are considering the Greens than older Canadians. So a move to the left would give them, that's where their base is. That is where they can get more votes. But it is a crowded area over there. The NDP, the Liberals, and the Bloc are all, center or center-left parties. And so for the Greens, it is having to crowd that out. And that's the challenge, is that how do they demarcate themselves from the other parties? And some of the candidates in this race would be considered left-wing within the NDP. So that would be one direction to go. But that is against the tradition of the Green Party. Elizabeth May used to work with Brian Mulroney. When she won her first riding at Saanich Gulf Islands in 2011, she won it from a Conservative. So the Greens have had a tradition of going after centrist voters. So a move to the left would be a bit of more of a departure for the Greens. Certainly the Greens are now more of a center-left party, but still it could be a bit of a shift for them if that is the way the members decide to go.
I want to remind everybody to send in your questions if you have them. As you can see, Eric and David know a lot about this race, and they're anxious and eager to answer them. You can send them to us on Twitter, on Instagram, as I said, whatever arm of the internet you're on right now. We're happy to take them at any point. You can tweet me directly as well, or send me a DM on Instagram, and I'm happy to get to them. There is a question that I did want to ask you, David, and I think, as we look to the stage and we await a speech from Elizabeth May, she was such a central figure to this party over the last, now more than a decade, especially on the federal scene here in Ottawa. How will the next leader escape, this person asks, Elizabeth May's shadow? How big of a deal do you think that is for not only the people running tonight, but I guess even the kind of future of the party too?
Yeah, Elizabeth May, I think, we're exiting the Elizabethan era, I guess you could say. She got the Greens into the House of Commons, and she often says, she was the second Green in the world, because the Green Party, is not just the Green Party of Canada, but it's linked to an international movement, so there are Greens in various countries. So she was the second Green to get elected, and that kind of kicked it off here and internationally and stuff like that. So it will be a challenge for the next leader to kind of, step out of the shadow of Elizabeth May. And she's not going anywhere. I mean, she's going to stay in the House of Commons. She is going to run in the next election, she keeps saying. So, she is going to be there. So that will be a challenge for the new leader. You even have people within the party who are saying that, allegedly May is trying to consolidate power, and she's holding on to power. We could talk about that, but I don't want to get too much into the weeds. So it will be a challenge. How do they do that? I mean, maybe they can learn from May. May has incredible ability to grab headlines and to get media coverage. So that's going to be, and that's a challenge for the Greens on any day. And so that will continue to be a challenge. And so the new leader will have to do that. There is some talk among candidates that, hey, electability and having a history of being elected is really important. And you have a lot of candidates in this race who, run for the Greens or run for other parties, and they haven't been elected. So, and that's very important. Visibility in the House of Commons, being able to, get up and to speak in Parliament is so important and goes a long way in helping Canadians to get to know you.
Eric, and I'll probably get both of you guys to weigh in on this. MLC on Facebook asks, do we know who the front runners are? I think this is an important question for people who haven't necessarily been paying close attention and who see how wide that field is and how many people, just the sheer number of people running. Eric, there are no polls that we can rely on, but there are a few indicators that give us some hints.
Yeah, David can probably talk about, what the feeling is in the party. But if we're looking, for example, at fundraising, Annamie Paul has been the fundraising leader. She's raised just over $200,000. And she's followed by Dimitri Lascaris. He raised about $147,000. Yep. And then after that, you're looking at candidates who raised less than $100,000. So they do seem to be the two front runners in that metric, fundraising, which is usually a pretty reliable metric. And also, they do have more endorsements from former candidates, right. Provincial party leaders or former party leaders. But it is a bit difficult. As you said, there hasn't been any polls that have been published. And, we're just kind of feeling our way forward.
Yeah, I think it's, and David, I'd love for you to weigh in on it as well. I think it's not only the amount, but the number of donors, too, from what I've read, that were higher for Annamie Paul and Dimitri Lascaris, and then significantly kind of dropped down for the rest of the pool. Tell us a bit about the two frontrunners. We've got Ms. Paul up on the screen right now. Why don't we start with her?
Yeah, well, Annamie Paul was one of the first candidates to enter into this race. In fact, I believe it was just in March or something like that. Her campaign gave me a call and said that she was entering, and she's really framed a bit of her campaign as being, if she's elected, this would be a historic day for Greens, because you would have the first Black woman elected and leading a federal party here in Canada. I mean, you have Jagmeet Singh, who is the leader of the NDP, so he was the first racialized leader to lead a party. But here, I guess you have another step when it comes to racialized representation within national Canadian politics, she would be the first one. And so she's framed that. So she's spoken a lot about issues such as diversity, the need for diversity within the Greens and the need for diversity within Canadian politics and policy, and to have that sort of lens on that stuff. So she's spoken a lot about, police reform, not defunding the police, but reforming the police and reforming the justice system and stuff like that. I think, just in reading her platform, she's really the only candidate who has proposed on the climate file something that is different. So she wants to put a carbon tax on imports, which is, something that we haven't seen from the Green Party or other candidates. Interestingly, we have seen that from the Joe Biden campaign, the U.S. Democratic presidential candidate. So she's spoken a lot about that. What else has she spoken about that really differentiates her from the other candidates?
She's only the second Jewish leader, right? And yeah.
Yeah.
Second Jewish federal leader.
I don't know that for sure.
Yeah, she should be the second Jewish leader after
Absolutely.
David Lewis of the NDP in 1971. Eric's nodding, so I think I'm
there
right.
You go. So there would be a lot of firsts. There would be a lot of firsts from her campaign tonight. And also, I just mentioned that she probably has had the most, certainly the most media and airtime, but. There's a bit more polish to her campaign that we're seeing, in terms of her website, in terms of her communications, in terms of reaching out to the reporters on the campaign and trying to get on your show. I'm sure you've been speaking a lot to her team and stuff like that. So there's, almost like a turnkey. This is almost like a turnkey candidate, I guess you could say that. On day one, she has a team. She has people behind her who would be willing to go. I can talk about Dimitri Lascaris if you like. He's the person who's raised the second amount. Yeah, so Dimitri Lascaris. So he has run for the Greens in the past. He has held various critic portfolios. I believe he was the justice critic for the Greens, but he is the eco-socialist in this race. So quite opposite from what Paul is proposing. He calls himself a radical, He wants to see the Greens move further to the left. So he's proposing things such as a wealth cap. So what he would say is that, you wouldn't be able to earn more than $500 million within a given period. Anything more than that would be taxed at 100%. I don't know if there's any country in the world that allows that, but essentially there'd be no billionaires in Canada if he was able to, implement that policy. Of course, he would need to get elected and whatnot. And so he's proposing stuff like that. He's also proposing things such as defunding the RCMP, defunding the Canadian military, and eventually, if I'm not mistaken, having a lesser role for those law enforcement and protection agencies. Also, pulling out of NATO. So, this Dimitri Lascaris is I guess, he has policies. He considers himself a radical. He is, he would certainly represent, Vashi, a change to the Greens if he's elected tonight. And there's a good chance that he might be, based on the fundraising numbers.
So I just want to let our audience know that if you're looking right now, or we were looking at the podium, things are kind of beginning to get underway, and we are going to hear from a couple different people. We won't hear from them, but we'll sort of keep our eye on them as they introduce things and get the program going. But the main event that we will start with is the speech from Elizabeth May, who isn't the leader right now, but of course was as of November 2019, and for so many years before that. She is the leader of the party in Parliament. The party has, of course, 3 seats right now. Eric, let's talk a little bit about that, because I got a question from Aiden P56. What needs to be a priority for the new leader during the current session of Parliament? And you've sort of talked a bit about this, how the focus for Canadians has really, it's not that they're not at all concerned about the environment, they still very much are, and that could impact whatever kind of recovery plan any government puts forward. But their focus right now, every other, besides this story tonight, we're talking about COVID-19 all the time, and the surge in numbers in this country, the story south of the border right now. That's where the focus is for Canadians, and it appears very much so that way in Parliament too.
Yeah, for the challenge is to find a place for the Greens in that conversation, because right now they're not really in that conversation. With all of the maneuvering in the House of Commons right now, it's been largely between, for example, the Liberals and the NDP, and the NDP has been able to extract concessions from the Liberals to get things passed, whereas the Greens have just kind of been off to the side. They don't have enough seats to hold a balance of power, so no one is really going for their votes anyway. So I think the big challenge for them is to just get into the conversation, to have their point of view presented. If it is someone like Annamie Paul, who is more of a continuation of the Green Party as it's been under Elizabeth May, then maybe there's not that much new, and it's more going to be about her ability to get attention and to be a charismatic leader and try to get some attention that way. If it's someone like Dimitri Lascaris, who's going to be taking the party in a very different direction, that could get a lot of attention too. But it is going to be a challenge for the Greens because in a minority parliament, normally the Greens like when it's a minority parliament, they have a little bit more influence, but in this one, they don't really. So it is going to be that challenge. And if Annamie Paul, we were talking about, turnkey candidate, she is going to be running for the Greens in the Toronto Centre by-election on October 26th. If she wins the leadership, she could theoretically be in the House as soon as the November. But that would be a challenge certainly to win that riding.
Yeah, Toronto Centre is a tough one. I think they're asking for the NDP. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sure you've heard this about the NDP not to run a candidate, just as they kind of afforded them that in the by-election that we covered, where Jagmeet Singh won, right?
Yeah, they want that leaders. I can't remember what the term is, but we've seen that in lots of by-elections in the past. But the New Democrats have not actually been one of the parties that has usually honored that covenant of not running against a new leader in a by-election. So it was a bit of an exception for them to want it from the Greens, and now the Greens are wanting some reciprocity on that. We'll see if they do it. I don't know if the NDP has a candidate yet for that riding. Maybe we'll see what they'll do.
If she becomes leader, I should qualify. If she becomes leader tonight, then they're asking for that. Yeah. If Annamie Paul does,
right. Yeah. Otherwise, she would just be the Green candidate, and there would be no onus on the NDP to not put a candidate up against her. And in the last federal election and in previous elections, Toronto Centre has been a riding where the NDP usually finishes second. Yeah. And they won it in the provincial election in Ontario in 2018. So
good point,
if the NDP did decide to step aside, that would actually give the Greens a decent shot, if still a very, very challenging shot. It would not be a riding. It would be one of the safer ridings for the Liberals in the country, I'd say.
Yeah, I would argue that too. I think that's what they think as well. David, I've got another question here. I'm not sure if you know the answer. My impression was who had the most individual donors. My impression was that was Annamie Paul, but I could, if I'm wrong, I'll look it up. But I'm not sure if you know the answer to that. But also just talk a little bit about the excitement around from party members. Like there has been an upswing in the number of people who wanted to cast a ballot today. For today, I should say. Yeah,
totally. Absolutely. No, the party has seen an increase in registered members. So I believe there are about 35,000 members registered to vote in this election. And I believe that's roughly double what they had registered, prior to going into this election. So, the party says that is a positive sign. It says that this race has created some excitement. But I mean, we should just can I maybe take that with a grain of salt? I was talking to some people from the party about, how many of these new members are, lapsed Greens who didn't renew their membership for a couple of years. How many of them are just, actually new people that are joining the party that never held a party membership. Paul Manley, he was just talking to me before we got on. He said he couldn't really tell. He couldn't really say. But so, we should just take that with a grain of salt. But nevertheless, people are quoting that number as a good sign that, this race has invigorated the party's base. And I do think there's some truth to that. Just in people that I've talked to, young people that I've spoken to, I had a conversation with this group called Justice Greens. They're, basically a group of young people who have been organizing on a gamer gamer social media platform. I think it's called Discord. I'm not a gamer, so I don't know. Any people in the comments who just want to just fact check me on that, feel free to do that. And they've just been organizing and, you know, seeing this race as an opportunity to help craft the future of the Greens. They want to see the Greens going to the left. Like I said, that's one of the main stories that has emerged in this race, and one of the main stories we're going to be telling over the next couple of days. So you're seeing within, I guess, the Ecosocialist wing or the very left wing of the party, there's some organizing there as well. And just, I think, you know, COVID-19, I mean, this might have not happened if it wasn't for the pandemic. It has really given the party a chance to really discuss and hash out issues. I mean, these candidates have been on Zoom debates, on, you know, telephone and virtual town halls, you know, in the last couple of weeks leading up to the campaign, every day they would be doing one of these events. So, you know, it has given an opportunity for, you know, Greens and people maybe who aren't registered Greens to kind of get a sense of what the party is about, to pose questions like people are posing on our live stream right now, and to discuss these issues. So no, I think it's invigorated, you know, the base.
It sounds exactly.
Maybe brought in some new members.
Yeah, it sounds exactly like the debate that took place south of the border this week. Sounds like you just described the exact same thing. Eric, I wanted to get you. I like the delay so that I think my joke bombed, but then no, 5 minutes later, David does laugh at it. It's like talking to my family. Yeah. Eric, I wanted to get while we wait for the speech and sort of the rest of the evening to get going, let's talk a bit about how this will work tonight and sort of the voting system at play. People could vote either through a mail-in option or online voting. And online voting actually closes, I think it was at 6:30 tonight. So it hasn't even closed. There's 20 more minutes, essentially, to continue voting.
Yeah, and as you know, and as you've experienced, when leadership votes are right up against the end of the night, that usually does not end up well. So let's hope that it's all going to go fine. Not going to be like the Conservatives just a little while back, or the New Democrats back in 2012. But yeah, so it's 35,000 people that are voting. Yeah, mostly voting online. I think there was the ability to vote by mail.
Yes.
I believe so. Yes, and. It's a one-member, one vote. So unlike the Conservative race had equal weighting for every riding. This one is more like the NDP leadership vote, where just you get 20,000 votes on Vancouver Island. It's worth 20,000 votes. It's not weighted by riding. And also, it's a preferential ballot, which will be an important factor here. Because if you're just looking at the fundraising numbers, no one is really at a place where you would expect a first ballot victory. So those second ranks, those third ranks will be pretty important for deciding the outcome here.
Okay, I'm going to actually, if you guys don't mind, in the control room, there's a video playing right now in tribute to Elizabeth May. So we'll listen into some of that before her speech. Let's take a listen.
The marvelous job that you've done in helping us all find our new way to the environment for a new Canada.
I want to add my voice to the voices of so many in thanking you for your extraordinary leadership.
Elizabeth, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for being a mentor, for being an inspiration, for being a model of what we needed to see in politics and what we need to keep seeing. You have been so important to me. I love you to bits, and I am so grateful for everything you've done for the Greens, but more importantly, for everything you've done for Canadians.
They figured out that there was someone quite young and female working behind the scenes, and they wanted to make that a story and discredit the whole movement.
The process was flawed from the get-go by lack of procedural fairness, the abuse of the rights of interveners in that process, and the courts will rule on that.
The thing about you, Elizabeth, is that you see opportunities where no one else does. Opportunities to change the course of history. You make things happen, and you inspire others to do the same.
No one was more helpful than Elizabeth May. She was the spark plug of major changes in attitudes on the environment in Canada and action by the Government of Canada. From the national parks we established, to the Acid Rain Treaty, to the Montreal Protocol, to the depollution of the St. Lawrence River and the Great Lakes, Elizabeth was at my side, playing a very key and valuable role as an advisor and as a doer. She was a doer, and she made things happen in the environment and ministry for all those years.
And look where Greens in Canada are today. A Green caucus in Parliament, a Green official opposition in PEI, Green MLAs in New Brunswick, Ontario, and British Columbia, all within the first-past-the-post electoral system, which we were not supposed to be able to crack, starting with your first win in Saanich, Gulf Island.
I want to salute you for your principled tenacity, but I want to salute you most for just being an intelligent, passionate, imaginative, charismatic, eclectic, eccentric leader of the Green Party.
Gaelic Hustla for all that you have done and all that you will continue to do.
Greens get elected is because of one secret ingredient called democracy.
We're too committed to saying Mother Earth.
Fighting for the environment. You mobilize tens of thousands of Canadians. You should be so proud of what you've accomplished. And I am very proud to say that Elizabeth May is my friend.
We could have arrested climate change before our glaciers were melting, before we were losing the Arctic, before our forests were on fire, before we saw drought and climate refugees and tornadoes in Ottawa. We had a chance in the 1990s and we blew it. The good news is we still have a chance to save ourselves. The grandchildren I tuck into bed at night, all of us know those children. They are our children. We have one chance to ensure that in their natural lifespans, they enjoy a hospitable biosphere that has sustained humanity since we first got up and walked on two legs.
So that was a tribute video to Elizabeth May. Some very familiar faces there, including former Prime Ministers Brian Mulroney, Paul Martin, as well as former Liberal Cabinet Minister Jody Wilson-Raybould. I think they're going to talk for a little bit, and then Elizabeth May herself will deliver a speech. David, why don't I just bring you in quickly while we wait for that interesting video there. Lots of different voices from different parties. We know, for example, that Ms. May served as an advisor to the government of former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney. He had some nice things to say. So did Paul Martin. A lot of her colleagues, obviously, among the Green Party, including the new leader of BC's Green Party, Sonia Furstenau. We've talked a bit about this, but this is a pretty big deal for the party, right? Elizabeth May has been the face of it for so long now.
Yeah, and she's, you know what, I caught some of the video. I was able to, watch it a bit on my phone. And I think that, the thing that stands out, and the thing that everyone says about May is that she's able to work across party lines. She kind of has to, if you're a lone MP in the House of Commons, if you want speaking time, if you want to appear before a committee, you're somewhat reliant on the charity of other people, the other parties. But, you hear that sentiment from not only people within the party, but outside the party, that, she has an amazing ability to, be nonpartisan and to get things done. So I think that's going to be a significant legacy that people are going to remember from. But yeah, this big shoes that have to be filled.
She did perfect timing, David, because she just walked up to the microphone with her green mask and her green blazer. So we'll listen in.
Forgive me for a moment. I'm one of the more COVID-phobic people you're ever going to meet, so I just want to get this right. Well, that video tribute was more than a surprise. Je suis bouleversée.
Yes, it's incredible. It's incredible to see those video clips of former prime ministers.
For anyone who was involved in putting that together, and I suspect my Chief of Staff, Deborah Endiger, was pretty closely engaged. We know that Paul Manley's not guilty, but it was pretty extraordinary. So allow me to collect myself. I also want to acknowledge that we're standing here on the traditional territory of the Algonquin Nation. And again, to say a heartfelt miigwech for extraordinary hospitality and generosity. It's not the convention we had planned, as Joanne just said, to be in a room With so few of our dearest friends, you will notice that I'm wearing the campaign button for my favorite candidate from 2019. You really shouldn't have favorites, but I married this one, so we've had quite the adventure. My husband and I, we only got married on Earth Day 2019 and went through an election and now a pandemic. And the good news is we're still in love, so that's good. I am deeply aware of the reality that although people talk about me as if I did all this stuff, it's not true. I'm part of a movement. I've always worked in that movement, and that movement is a movement for a better world. Some of those photos that went by in black and white, you might be wondering, what was that went by in black and white and looked like a little tiny girl sitting at a table with a bunch of, well, with my mom. That was actually my mother taking me to a press conference with her. I was basically a prop. I was there on behalf of all the innocent babies of the world who were being poisoned by atmospheric nuclear weapons testing. And my mother was launching a lawsuit internationally against the US, the UK, and Russia, the USSR at the time, along with 17 Nobel laureates. So that it just gives you one sense that I grew up in a household where we were taught from the very earliest age that if you see something, if you see an injustice, you say something. I remember my mother still has it in a scrapbook of the first letter I ever wrote to a president of the United States about seeing the abuse of the little black children in Selma, Alabama when they were bused into school. We were raised from the very earliest age to know that one person can change the world. So here, what we've done globally is Global Greens. We're part of a global movement in 90 countries around the world. We do it from the grassroots up, never from the top down. So I was thinking as I was putting together some thoughts to share, because it's a great honor as we are on the verge of having our first newly elected leader since 2006. We're on the verge of a big change, and it's very generous of the party to ask me to share a few words, and I really appreciate the opportunity. So I'm thinking right now of other Green women leaders in Canada. I'm thinking of you because you're in the thick of it. So a shout out to Naomi Hunter, not so long ago elected leader of the Green Party of Saskatchewan, who is traveling across the province largely on her own in some places, with the teams working hard in Saskatoon and Regina. She's on the road making sure that they have a full slate for the Saskatchewan election. That's right, the Greens in Saskatchewan currently have a candidate in every riding, but they have to collect all the signatures. They have to get her done. So a shout out to Naomi Hunter. And then at the other end of a spectrum of who has resources, who's already elected, who has already shown that you change the politics of your province, to my dear friend Sonia Furstenau, who, of bad luck in timing, was elected after a prolonged leadership race because of COVID, was elected leader of the Green Party of British Columbia on September 14th, only to have John Horgan break a fixed election date law and tear up the agreement for stable government and call a snap election, as we all know. Sonia's brilliant. Sonia's brave. And she and Adam Olsen, who hold the 2 Green seats in the BC legislature, will be joined soon by many more elected Green MLAs in British Columbia. There's only a matter of days before they vote, but they've got the platform together. They have 74 candidates lined up. So Sonia, just a shout out that I love you, and British Columbians are going to love you when they get to know you. Sonia, I love the idea of Premier Sonia Furstenau. It's got a very Borgen sound to it, really. And actually, that's so much better than that stale reality show, Horgan, but never mind. To my dear friend, Joanne Roberts, who took on the job nearly 11 months ago today, of interim leader when I decided to step down and walk away, which I had promised my daughter I would do. I know my daughter would be watching this on TV tonight, but she's actually out in Vancouver right now. There's a Justice for Joyce rally. They're all over the country, and we better make sure we stick with that. But I just want to thank Joanne from the bottom of my heart for stepping up and being interim leader of the Green Party of Canada through a tumultuous year. I mean, who could have predicted COVID-19? I sometimes think it's like the old Monty Python skit, no one expects the Spanish Inquisition, but it's turned all of our lives upside down, and Joanne's handled it with tremendous grace and living up to all our green values. You know, a lot of people often ask me about what it's like to be a woman in politics. It's extraordinary to me when I think about it, that in the 13 years that I served as leader of the Green Party of Canada, no other party had a woman leader. That's not a good thing. It's not a good thing for our little girls, that when they look at a stage where people are debating in a leaders' debate, they don't see a woman leader. So it does take a certain amount of, for all women in politics, particularly since social media got so vile, it does take developing a bit of a thicker skin. But women leaders in the Green Party are many, and my inspiration, a source of inspiration for me for a very long time, was a Green Party leader that I got to know back when we were part of the World Women's Congress for a Healthy Planet in '92, the founder of the Green Party of Germany, the late Petra Kelly. Now, when I spoke on that stage in Ottawa 14 years ago, August, to accept the leadership of the Green Party of Canada, I ended my speech with these words from Petra Kelly. We, the generation that faces the next century, can add the solemn injunction, if we don't do the impossible, we shall be faced with the unthinkable. On doit faire l'impossible ou faire
we have to do the impossible or face the unthinkable. And right now, we are living in unthinkable times. The pandemic, the climate emergency. We are facing huge challenges, catastrophic forest fires, and the smoke in the air threatening our health. The snow cap melting. Fires taking place in the tropical lands of Brasilia. And every single day, there is a new disaster, a new disaster.
The years that have passed since I read Petra's solemn injunction have seen global crises accelerating. The world is less fair. The climate change issue has accelerated to the climate emergency. Since that time I read those words, Canada's greenhouse gases have continued to rise. Also on the rise is an unwelcome new rider on one of the four horsemen of apocalypse, increasing trends towards white supremacy, racism, fascism, disguised as populism. To this we must also push back. We must bar the doors against such sinister forces of hatred. And we must shine a light. It's the light that we hold up, whether it's a torch, or whether it's a lantern. The next leader of this party must continue to shine a light on hypocrisy, shine a light on those politicians that I am so disappointed in, so many of those who've said nice words about we must act to address the climate crisis and then don't. Don't worry if I'm looking at you, John Horgan. I am so angry that today they're diverting the Peace River for the Site C Dam, and no British Columbia government official can speak to it, they say, because there's an election. Convenient that. We must hold a light high also that gives people hope, that shows every single part of our society that if we hang on to each other and hang on together, we can get through a pandemic and we can resolve and avoid the worst of the climate crisis. Recently, speaking virtually to a gathering of the Union of BC Municipalities, Margaret Atwood was asked what she thought of the idea that because of COVID-19, action on climate had to be pushed to a back burner. And she said, well, I don't know about you, but my stove has 2 front burners. That's how we must look at these dual crises. The pandemic of COVID-19 that threatens our health in the near term. We have to make sure our kids are safe going back to school. We have to make sure that women are safe to go back to work. This is a real and present danger, and it's not over yet. We must have trust in our institutions enough to say, if a medical officer of health tells us something, we do it. We don't debate it. And at the same time, we have to be able to look at the climate crisis and say, we also, in the same instance, have to listen to the science. In the same way, we have to take the advice of scientists and not question it, but do it. Because the reality of this is that the climate emergency is a far greater threat to humanity, to loss of millions of lives, to the collapse of human civilization within the lifetime of our children if we don't get our act together. But here's where it's important for Greens to be clear in speaking truth to power. That truth can't lead anyone to feel despair. We don't have time for despair. It's an enormous threat. We must hang together, believing and knowing that we have it within ourselves to change our society, to turn away from fossil fuels, and to turn towards those wonderful new technologies that will deliver all the services that, let's face it, fossil fuels were a one-time miracle for humanity and catapulted us to levels of progress and technology that we could never have imagined in the 1800s or, for heaven's sakes, the 1500s. We haven't been on this planet that long as a species, but in a cosmic blink of an eye, we've become the dominant force on this planet. We are now the single biggest threat to our own survival, and we have to, as Greens, make sure everyone understands that we should have and we must have hope. The kind of hope we need. I'm carrying a book to the podium. If I could, I'd read you aloud the whole book. This is Thomas Homer Dixon's new book, Commanding Hope, which presents hope not as some sort of dewy-eyed dreamer idea, but as an actual tool in our hands so that we can save ourselves. As US academic David Orr said a number of years ago, hope is a verb with its sleeves rolled up. That's where you find Greens, doing the work, commanding the hope to say, we don't give up. Or as Thomas Homer Dixon talks about in his book, he is not prepared to tell his children that we are a failed species. I'm not prepared to tell my children and grandchildren that. This generation, those of us who are still, I'm 66, okay, what more can we do? Well, we can do more. We must do more. We are the generation most responsible, and we cannot walk away, or in this case, die, and leave our kids with this Mad Max world of a dystopian nightmare. We won't do it. We can't do it. Ça m'inspire écouter les paroles des jeunes.
The words of young people, environmentalist, anti-racist young people, they inspire me. They have courage. They are prepared to speak up. And that is a source of inspiration to me, the young people of Canada.
Collectively, the young, the old, the rich, the poor, all of us together, Canadian society pulling together, that can make this difference, that can still provide leadership to the world. It is, as Petra Kelly told us we must do, it is our responsibility to do the impossible. Not to be afraid of the fact that once you say it's impossible, it looks like you're tilting at windmills, that you're naive idealists who don't understand the real world. In the real world, as Greta Thunberg says, our house is on fire. And although I initially absorbed her words as metaphor, they increasingly feel literal. Our house is on fire. We have to listen to the science on climate just as much as we listen to the science on COVID. When the Chief Medical Officer, Theresa Tam, told us to stand 6 feet apart, the politicians in this country didn't say to her, sorry, Dr. Tam, we think 3 feet should be good enough for you because you know that other party won't give you 3 feet, so this is the best you're going to get. Same thing on climate. We cannot have the same target Stephen Harper left behind and have a speech from the throne that says, well, we're going to do better than that 2030 Harper target. Well, we have to do double that if we're going to ensure our children have a livable world. That livable world will require a lot of changes for social justice, equity, fairness, and also, of course, a hospitable climate. Nelson Mandela had a wonderful comment on doing the impossible. He said, "It always seems impossible until it is done." So for all of you out there who've ever thought about voting Green or wondered about what difference it makes to have Greens in Parliament, in legislatures across the country, and thank you to all my friends who contributed to that video, that was so lovely. But I remember when one of you, I won't say which one because I don't want to out the reporter who, sometimes reporters tell politicians things that are actually off the record. But one of our new wonderful Greens had been elected in a province across Canada, and I was doing an interview in a studio in that province, and the reporter said to me, you know, we're awfully glad he got elected because our legislature needed an integrity transfusion. That's what we bring to legislatures across Canada. That's what's needed in Victoria, in Regina, in Ottawa, in Fredericton, in Halifax. That's Charlottetown. That's what's needed. So our job in doing the impossible is to actually make the future we need real to Canadians. A future that we can embrace must be made real. A future where racism is a thing of the past, where Indigenous truth, justice, and reconciliation are actually realized, not just talked about, but respected and done. A future where nobody has to go without needed medication because they don't have a drug plan that covers something they need and they can't afford it. Pharmacare is essential. We were the first party in the last number of decades to put it in our platform. Guaranteed livable income. We were the party that led the way, and now lots of parties are talking about it. And I do say to other parties, please do continue to steal our ideas, but don't just take the words and then let us down by not delivering. We can, as Canadians, build the kind of country built, again, like the Green Party is, at the grassroots. Resilient communities where we take care of each other. That's the essence of Canada for me, that we're a country where south of the border, there's no universal health care. The only industrialized country in the world with such an atrocity. Here we are just over the border, having made that decision that no one goes without medical help. Well, now we need to make the decision that nobody goes without enough money to have a roof over their head, feed their kids, and not be afraid of a mortgage foreclosing during a pandemic. We now have to be the ones, and our new leader will take forward this cause, explain it to Canadians better than I ever could, because we are going to build the society we want and we need. And in that, Canadians know how deeply we care for each other. We're a country built on compassion, and we will keep each other safe until that day when we're able to hug each other again. Merci. Miigwech. Thank you.
That is the leader of the Green Party, the outgoing, I should say, parliamentary leader, but leader for many years, for 13 years, Elizabeth May. She resigned back in November of 2019. I'm Vashi Kapelos. I'm coming to you from our Parliamentary Bureau here in Ottawa. Welcome to all of our viewers joining us on CBC News Network. I'm here with my colleagues Eric Grenier and David Thurton. As you're looking there at the podium, there's going to be some housekeeping that takes place, and then we're going to actually get a little bit of a rundown of how voting went, the total number of ballots cast, a little bit of logistics. So we'll head back to the podium when that starts to happen, and then the results will be announced, and we'll hear from the winner. Let's, David and Eric, quickly go over what we heard from Miss May. A couple of things jumped out at me, and then we'll get to some more questions, because in the interim I've had like a bazillion sent to me, so people are anxious to get your take on a number of other things that we haven't yet covered, and I apologize, it's hard to get to everything in the race. First of all, in Ms. May's speech, I thought, Eric, to your point, about the pandemic and how that's really become such a focus for Canadians and Parliament. There was an acknowledgement of that by Ms. May, but an appeal to Canadians, I think, and to Parliament that should not be at the expense of the climate crisis. I think she said that there can be two front burners, that they are dual crises, and that that should inform the decision making. It should also, I seem to gather, really inform the way in which the direction the party takes and how focused the next leader has to be on both those crises, really.
Yeah, for the Green Party, they will often emphasize that they aren't just a one-issue party, that they do care a lot about other things. But the environment is the #1 issue for their voters. And in polls, when people ask, who is the best party to handle the environment, often in lots of the provinces where there's a popular Green Party, for example, that they will outpoll whatever governing party is in office. So it is still an extremely important issue for the Green Party and for their voters. But with COVID-19 being such a huge issue, and for a lot of Canadians, it is the top issue, and also how the country is going to get out of it, how the economy is going to recover. It is hard for the Greens to get themselves into that conversation. And emphasizing that the environmental issue, the climate change crisis, that's not going away, that is still a big problem, even as we're in the midst of a pandemic. The Green Party needs to keep pushing that message, because for their voters, that's what makes them stand out from the other parties.
I think, David, and you'll probably know better than me, but going through many of their platforms, there certainly was an acknowledgement of that. Like, the environment is a huge portion of it, as it is, to be fair, in other parties' platforms as well. But there was, like, for example, a number of them plotted out what a green recovery would look like and what kind of investments in such a recovery they could be making as far as the environment goes. At the same time, there are issues around immigration, around asylum seekers, around the healthcare system, all of which are acknowledged and sort of discussed throughout each of the candidates' policy platforms.
Yeah, no, it's not just about the environment. In fact, I think in just going through a lot of the candidates' platforms, there was very little new proposals from the 8 candidates in this race who want to replace Elizabeth May as to how they would tackle the climate crisis differently. Most agree that they need to reduce emission levels by 60% based on 2005 levels. So that is the Harper target. That is, more than the Harper target. And most of them are agreeing in that, we need to phase out fossil fuels, which is, somewhat in line with what the Green Party is saying today. But, they have campaigned on a range of other issues, such as, the need for a guaranteed livable income. So Glenn Murray, ex-Winnipeg mayor, he has costed that out. How that could work in, given the situation that we're having right now, without creating more of a greater deficit, which is something that Greens would argue you need as the economy transitions to more cleaner fuels. There are a lot of people, especially in Alberta, if the Greens get their way, who would stop working. There would no longer be a future for them in the oil patch, and they would need something to carry them through. So a guaranteed livable income would be one of those things. I think people in Alberta would say, you know what, show me how much I'm going to get on that guaranteed income, and I'll show you how much I make in the oil patch. But anyways, so yeah, you had a lot of Greens who were proposing those things. You had a lot of Greens who were also pitching stuff that we need to reform the system when it comes to our justice system, when it comes to tackling systemic racism and things like that.
Okay, gotcha. I want to just quickly get to some more questions while we wait another 4 or 5 minutes or so until we can expect some of the lay of the land to come from the party itself. First of all, Eric, both you and I were tagged on Twitter, and I think it's worth acknowledging that we were talking about the race if Annamie Paul is successful tonight, how they were hoping the NDP wouldn't run someone in Toronto Centre, but it looks like that they already have somebody.
Yeah, we were reached out to on Twitter that the NDP has nominated Brian Chang to run again in Toronto Centre. So the NDP seems to have a candidate. It doesn't sound like they're going to stand aside for the next Green leader if it is Annamie Paul who ends up winning the leadership race.
Okay, here is a question I got on Instagram. I joined the Green Party when Jim Harris was leader. I was a red Tory without a party that reflected my values. They called us eco-capitalists or blue-greens. I have remained a supporting member since then. You talk about eco-socialists. Are red Tories like me a factor at all in the Green Party these days? What do you think, Eric?
Yeah, I think that's one of the big shifts that we're seeing, that the Green Party is getting away from that more centrist tradition. The Green Party, when it started under Jim Harris and also under Elizabeth May for much of her time as leader, was a environmental party with otherwise centrist positions. So if in the end, and we've seen, as David was just laying out, all of the candidates, almost all of the candidates have at least, you would say, more left-wing positions and proposals, and some of them, as David also mentioned, self-described radical left-wing policy. So it would be a shift to the left for the Green Party. And for a lot of those centrist voters, in certain parts of the country, for example, like Atlantic Canada, where it's not necessarily a left-wing Green vote, maybe they won't find a home with that kind of party. So that is one of the debates that we're seeing, whether the party needs to continue being more of a mainstream center-left environmentalist party, or something like the, following in the footsteps of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in the United States with the new Green Deal, if that's the way that the Greens have to go in order to, galvanize their support, particularly among young Canadians.
David, another question that I've actually gotten frequently. Yeah, you jump in on that, and then I have another one for you. Go for it.
Sure. Yeah. I'll just quickly mention that, yes, there are quite a number of candidates that are to the left, but there are also a number of candidates who want to see, the party remain in the center, which, candidates on the left, which basically say that's code for going to the right, going back to, the history, the legacy of the party that Eric was speaking about. Like, you have candidates like David Merner, who told me that, he cannot go on knocking in his riding out on Vancouver Island, Esquimalt Sanet, I'm going to mess up the name of the riding, so I'll just say on Vancouver Island, and he cannot go knocking on doors without telling voters that he can balance the budget. So, there's some candidates that still want to maintain that legacy that Eric was talking about.
Okay.
Not everyone wants to take it to the right.
Yeah, tell us a bit more about those candidates, because I am getting a lot of requests from people who aren't super familiar with the race to try and find out a bit more beyond the two that we've really profiled, the two top fundraisers, Dimitri Lascaris and Annamie Paul. Why don't you start with David Merner? What can you tell us about him, David? Well, yeah, David Merner, he's a former Liberal. He got into politics in 2015. He said that he had gone into politics because he didn't like the way the direction the country was heading under Stephen Harper. So he left the, nonpartisan public service, ran for the Liberals in that 2015 election. I have my dates right. Yeah, the 2015 election on that riding on Vancouver Island, Esquimalt Sanet. Hopefully I have the pronunciation correct. And he came in second to the NDP. The Liberals, of course, got into power in that election. And Justin Trudeau bought a pipeline, he said, the Trans Mountain Pipeline, and he said he could not remain a Liberal anymore. So he ran for the Greens in the last election in 2019. Eric could probably tell me how well he did, but he did, he lost to the NDP. But, he beat the Liberals in that riding in 2019. He beat the Conservatives in 2019. He does not consider himself to the right. He considers himself a leftist. But again, he says that, he needs to present, if he's leader, a fiscal responsible platform, not one where you just spend unlimited amount of money, as some candidates want to see. You also have Andrew West. He is from here in Ottawa. He's one of the younger candidates in this race. And he, was quite unapologetic. He said, I'm in this race to woo disaffected Conservative voters, because he says that there are people within the Conservative Party, I guess they were the Progressive Conservatives, the progressive wing of that party, who believe in environmental policy, who believe the Conservatives have lost their way on these things, who believe in a carbon tax, who would say that the Conservatives were the first to propose a carbon tax. And they believe that there's space for the party to grow by attracting those voters. And then you have Annamie Paul, who doesn't subscribe to any labels, won't say whether David,
she's on the left.
I might interrupt you for a second. Right. Sorry, if you don't mind. We'll just head back. I just want to, because they're going to lay out some of the sort of vote tallies and things like that. I think that's happening right now. So we'll just take a listen in and find out if that's the case.
Gather to host our diverse and very impressive slate of leadership contestants. 15 000 nouveaux membres se sont joints au parti pour pouvoir voter dans cette course à la chefferie, ce qui veut dire qu'à l'heure actuelle, nous comptons parmi nous 35 000 membres. The system that we're using to determine our new leader uses the single transferable vote. And unlike the first past the post system, no votes are lost in this way of electing someone. Every voter ranks their contestants in order of preference on their ballot. And after the first count, the contestant with the fewest number of votes is dropped and eliminated. And all of the votes, the second choice votes on those ballots, are then redistributed to the remaining contestants. And this process of elimination and redistribution continues until we have a winner. The preliminary voting results are in. 23,877 ballots were cast out of 34,680 members, ce qui veut dire que 69% de nos membres
That
ont
represents 69% of our members. That's the percentage that voted.
11,939 votes. It is now my pleasure to introduce a video message and musical performance from Tanya Aganaba, interdisciplinary artist, musician, facilitator, and Green Party member living on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations.
So we'll pull out of this for a little while they get some performances before they deliver the results there. Once again, I'm Vashi Kapelos. I'm coming to you from our Parliamentary Bureau. We're covering the Green Party's leadership race, and we got some interesting numbers there, Eric. I heard most of them. My earpiece was cutting a little bit in and out. But first of all, 23,877, I think, votes cast out of about 34,000 voters. So that represents about 69% of the possible votes. Is that what you heard as well?
Yeah, and that's a good number for a leadership race. Often it's hard to get 100% because there are a lot of members who are members of the party, that their membership just kind of is still there active, but they're not actually active members. I can't recall what the exact turnout was for the Conservative race, but it was similar to that kind of number. So we are seeing that a lot of Green members, the 35,000 or give or take, that signed up, that the vast majority of them did vote. To put that into context, in 2006, when Elizabeth May became leader, there was only 3,300 people who voted. So it shows just how much that party has grown. Yeah, that's a pretty big number in terms of difference from just 2006. So the Green Party is certainly a lot more mainstream than it was back in 2006, when it was still really on the fringes of Canadian politics.
And the way it works in the system, which you were explaining a bit before, but I think that was prior to when we joined our viewers here on News Network, they outlined that it was about, I didn't hear the exact number, but over 11,000, obviously, that would be necessary in order to clinch the victory.
Right, because it's a one-member, one-vote system. Yeah. And that means that you need to get at least 50% of the ballots that are cast in order to win the vote. And it is a ranked ballot, which means that, for example, if no one hits 50% on the first round, the lowest ranked candidate, the candidate who finished last, is dropped, and then their votes are redistributed. And that process keeps happening until one of the candidates gets to 50% of the vote.
And David, that's where sort of much of our discussion tonight becomes really interesting in the context of this race, because you talk about some of the divisions, the alignments of candidates, either, you know, more on the left versus more on the centrist side, where they envision taking the party. And that in a rank system could end up, you know, meaning quite a bit, right? Depending on where the more centrist candidates rate the other ones, et cetera, et cetera. So especially with the top two, with Dimitri Lascaris and Annamie Paul, who we anticipate could be the front runners, only because of the fundraising. We don't have any polls, so don't hold me to it. But what I mean to say is that it could actually really factor into where those kind of second and third place votes go.
So I'm not a math wizard. This is the part that this is the part of the show I'm very uncomfortable with. So I'm going to leave all that to
maybe I'll throw it back to Eric.
And maybe you, Vashi. But I'll just quickly say that yes, that the candidates have been talking about in the last couple of days. Okay, I want you to vote for me, but here's the other two candidates, here's the other three candidates I want you to vote for. So we've been talking a lot about the Ecosocialists in this race, the people who want to bring the party to the left. They've been very organized in this race. So Dimitri Lascaris is the front runner, at least in fundraising, and so you have people within that wing saying, put Dimitri first, followed by Miriam Haddad, one of the 8 candidates in the race, and then Amita Kurtner is the other candidate that you should rank in that order.
Right, gotcha. Eric, can you weigh in on that, on just sort of how that might factor in? And this is not, I should say, unique to the Green Party. We had this exact same conversation during the entire Conservative leadership too.
Yeah, exactly. Whenever there's a race like this where there's a ranked ballot, it all becomes about second choices. Who has the growth potential? And as David is laying out, there does seem to be two paths, you could say, to winning the leadership. That is getting that more left-wing vote from Amita Kurtner and Miriam Haddad and Dimitri Lascaris. If that vote can combine to be more than 50%, that gives a chance for him to emerge. But Annamie Paul, if she can get the support of Glenn Murray, a former Ontario Liberal cabinet minister, former mayor of Winnipeg, Courtney Howard, who's a physician from the Northwest Territories, and someone like David Merner out on Vancouver Island, who used to be a Liberal as well. if that vote is more than 50%, then someone like Annamie Paul could end up winning. So I think those are the two kind of paths that we're seeing, and we're expecting, I should say, and we'll have to see if it plays out like that, or, you know, if with these ranked ballots and the sense that it is just a one-member, one vote, some unpredictable things could happen. We could see that someone who finishes in third or fourth on the first ballot is able to overtake one of the two front runners, and then you have to sort of redo all the numbers again just to see how that could play out on that final ballot, whatever ballot it'll be. We don't really know how many it'll be. Yeah. Based on where the fundraising was, unlikely it'll be a first ballot result. So it could take several ballots before we have a winner.
And just to set the scene a bit for those of you who are joining us, I'm hopefully not looking like I'm being rude by looking at my phone. I'm just trying to look for questions because we've gotten so many from people who are watching. So I will for sure send them to Eric and David in a second. But just to give you a bit of a lay of the land, we are anticipating in a little while, just after 7, in fact, that there will be somebody from the party that steps up to the podium that you saw Elizabeth May not too long ago delivering her farewell speech at, who delivers the results, and then the winner will emerge and will deliver a speech. And David, my understanding is it might be by video, right? Like it's not, I don't think all the candidates are there with you at the Ottawa Art Gallery.
No. Most of the candidates, in fact, are off-site. I did dip into the auditorium where they are having this. Dr. Courtney Howard is here on site. She is here in person. She came down from the Northwest Territories. That's where she lives. But most of the candidates are off-site right now. They're in their hotel rooms. They're just, I guess, watching this broadcast, watching other live streams. Sitting at their edge of their seats, because we don't know. Like, there is no polling. The fundraising numbers are too close to say that one candidate has it in the bag. So yeah. I'm not 100% sure how they're going to give the speech. I could follow up with you and get that answer for you in just a second. But yes, they're not on site right now because of COVID-19, because of the pandemic. And, I'm texting with them right now, and they are nervous. They are, on the edge of their seats.
Yeah, and it certainly will be unique. I feel like we've been saying that so often, Eric, over the past little while, but even delivering the results for the Conservatives. Leadership ended up being incredibly unique. To recap, we did just find out that more than 23,000 Green Party members cast a ballot in this. They'll therefore need more than 11,000 votes to be able to secure the victory. A question that I got that I thought was an interesting one, is there any evidence that the Greens, particularly a more leftist Greens, would be able to motivate non-voters at all? So people, you talk a bit about how the demographic, how many young people are sort of enthused by the Green Party, and I know David Coletto from Abacus has talked about this as well, but is there an ability in that pool to motivate people who are not inclined to vote normally, or haven't yet maybe?
Well, I think that's certainly a possibility for younger voters, because younger voters do tend to be further left to begin with, and much more likely to vote for the Green Party, but also much less likely to vote at all. So that is certainly one way that the Green Party could grow its base, by galvanizing more younger left-wing Canadians who do not see representation in the other parties. But another thing for the Greens that has worked out for them pretty well, especially out in Atlantic Canada, is that being a more nonpartisan party, that they try to work with the other parties, that they aren't as polarized
and Elizabeth May was
go after the other
that.
Parties. She did, and that has worked out very well for them on Prince Edward Island, for example, where they have the official opposition. So there's a lot of voters who just don't like politics, don't like the sometimes nasty nature of it. And a party that that takes a bit more of a collaborative approach could get those people out to vote. So there are different ways for the Greens to try to get some non-voters to actually get out to the polls, which is always a huge untapped sort of pool of voters that all the parties are going after.
David, a couple questions as well around the policies and the platforms, and I thought this was a good one that kind of summed it up. What kind of policies will likely be in the Green Party's futures based on the similarities among campaign platforms?
So just, you had a question about, how the new leader is going to deliver their speech. I've just been texted by Mirner, who's one of the candidates who wants to become a leader of the Greens. She says that, just confirm that if the candidate is in Ottawa, they will give the speech at the podium. If the candidate is not, and there are 3 candidates who are not, the speech, their victory speech will be done via Zoom. So just clarifying that. So, what are the similarities that I think will be in a future Green platform? It's so important to mention that the Greens, the policy of this party is not developed by the candidates. And I know I've been talking for the past couple of days about their ideas, their big ideas and stuff like that, but in some sense, in some ways, it's a moot point, because all of their ideas that they're pitching and they're proposing, it still needs to get approval from the party membership at some point in time. But nevertheless, I just want to, give that person an answer to their question. Definitely phasing out fossil fuels by 2040 is something that is not in the current Green platform that was presented in the last election. So I think a lot of candidates have pitched that. I think we probably will see that going forward. We did see in the last platform phasing out fracking, but we didn't see that firm commitment to all fossil fuels. So I think that's something that we'll definitely see. Anything else? I could,
the UBI,
nothing is top of mind, because yes, guaranteed livable income. Well, that was always in the Green Party platform for a significant period of time. Possibly, definitely reforms to Canada's justice system, reforms to the police system. There seems to be a lot of there's disagreement, but there's some consensus among the candidates that we are at a moment where the system is not working. Systemic racism is a huge issue within our justice system, within police here in Canada. So you have a range of candidates who are saying that needs to change. Everything from defunding police to making reforms, bringing in more mental health workers to work with police. So it definitely runs the range of that. I think we'll definitely see that being a proposal that will go to the party membership for approval.
Do you want to, if you don't,
I'd also just,
go ahead,
just jump in.
Yeah, please do.
Electoral reform is always one of the things the Greens are very big on, right? And that has always been, as David mentioned, there are some things that have always been in the platform that are going to continue to be. Changing the electoral system is certainly one that the Greens have always wanted to, and they were deeply, deeply disappointed when the Liberals went back on their promise in the 2015 election campaign to change the way Canadians vote.
Yeah, that's one that jumps out at me. I think David's absolutely right. There are some, policies being proposed by various campaigns that are maybe different than what we've seen before. But in general, I think you can expect action on some sort of basic income, 100%. That's something I saw across all the party platforms. More aggressive action on climate change, more aggressive targets. You heard Elizabeth May reference, for example, the target or even the promised in the throne speech by the Liberals to exceed the current target as not enough. So they seem pretty solid on that front. But you're right, David, I think, to bring up the justice reforms, because there's some differences on how they would want to pursue that. But there does seem to be, consensus among most of the platforms that there needs to be some pursuit of reform to the justice system because of the unequal outcomes we see for so many racialized people in this country.
Yeah, another idea that I think we could see if we have time, Bashi, is, some reform to our tax system to better distribute the wealth within this country. I think this party has started a conversation that many Canadians have been having about, we have the super rich in this country, and they're arguing that they're not paying their fair share of their taxes. And yes, we do have the NDP and the Liberals who are proposing a wealth tax. But you have in this race this conversation that wealth tax needs to be more aggressive, and possibly we need to see a cap on wealth. So, in theory, you can only make this many millions if you live in Canada. Otherwise, the government's going to tax 100% of that. So I think, maybe the policy, there won't be a wealth cap policy in the next platform from the Greens, but we're going to definitely see maybe more aggressive language on that, certainly.
Okay, Eric, a couple of questions coming in for you. Sorry, I just want to try and pull them up. Somebody asked how many candidates are considered in contention. This gives us an opportunity to review the fact that we don't really know, other than from a few indicators, who is in quote unquote in contention. Really, they all are for all that we know, because we don't have any polling to tell us otherwise.
Yeah, I think that's probably the safest thing we can say. We can say that there are some of them that have a much better shot. When we are looking at the endorsements, the fundraising, that you do see Annamie Paul and Dimitri Lascaris being considered the front runners. But if you're also just looking at the amount of money that was raised, Glenn Murray, Courtney Howard, David Merner, they all raised at least between $70,000 and $100,000. So they could potentially, because of the ranked ballot, find their way among the top two, whoever it is, and then find themselves as the winner. So there are multiple paths here. And because we don't have the polling, the fundraising numbers are interesting, but they're not always predictive.
Yeah.
It is a bit difficult to know exactly what it is. And we're also, we are talking about roughly 23,000 votes that were cast. Well, that's not a huge amount of votes, right? So it doesn't take a lot for the candidates to move around in terms of where they go from round to round on that second choice, who gives them their second and third choice. So, yeah, I would say that you're probably looking at 5 to 6 that are, reasonably in contention. But yeah, we can't really say much more than that.
David, why don't you help us go through a little bit more of those candidates that we haven't really touched on yet? There's a few of them. You brought up the fact that you were just getting a text from Miriam Haddad about how the winner's speech would go. Can you tell us a bit more about her?
And I'll just quickly mention that everything seems to be going well with the counting. I'm just texting with the party's press sec. And she's saying that, they'll give us a 10 minutes heads up when they're ready to announce their first round.
Yeah, and I don't think we have that yet.
So stay tuned if you're joining us on the live stream. So yeah, we're waiting in for that. So Marian Haddad, you wanted to talk about Marian Haddad. Yes, so if she's elected tonight, she would be, I guess, the first millennial leader of a political party here in Canada. She was telling me that, as I was walking in, there's a lot of firsts tonight if, whoever's elected, if certain candidates are elected tonight. And, she would be the first millennial elected to lead a federal party in Canada. How awesome is that? So yeah, she is one of the other eco-socialists in the race. I feel like you could play a drinking game with how many times we're saying eco-socialism.
Well, we're on the network now, so
yeah,
we can't. We have to wait till we're back on the live stream, and then we can crack them open. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll wait till that. We'll wait till we're off, the public airways. So yes, she is unapologetically an eco-socialist. She considers herself a radical. She is pursuing these policies such as a wealth cap, taxing the rich, defunding the police, and trying as much as possible to move this party to the left. She says, I gave you an analogy earlier about the watermelon and how that represents eco-socialism. That's the symbolism for her campaign. The green for the planet, the red for the people. And so she has been pushing these issues. Also, she's been an outspoken voice within the party about the need for diversity, the need for the Greens to reflect this country, not in terms of ethnicity and race, but also in terms of sexuality as well. She is an openly gay candidate. She's a proud lesbian, she says, and she wants to see the Green Party to represent all these people. And whatever the outcome tonight, she told me that for her, this real success of this has been the ability to galvanize a movement that she hopes will help push the party in the direction that she thinks herself and other young people would like to see the Greens go.
Okay, let's go through some other candidates. I'll go to Eric for this one because Glenn Murray is probably one of the more recognizable names, at least to people who have thought about politics or watched politics for a number of years.
Yeah, and he's the only one with elected experience. He was elected as the mayor of Winnipeg, and then he moved to Ontario and became a Ontario Liberal. He won provincially back in 2004, just looking at my notes, 2010. And then he was actually an environment minister. So he has sat around the cabinet table. He was in Dalton McGuinty's cabinet and then Kathleen Wynne's cabinet to 2017. And so he does bring that experience. He's had a bit of a trouble during this campaign because there was a snafu with the Green Party processing donations. The way that the system worked is that you donated to the party, and then the party distributed those donations to the candidate that people wanted those donations to go to. And he was missing out at about $10,000,
It was a substantial amount, yeah.
It was about 10% of his entire fundraising. So he was a little bit, hobbled by that. And they were only really able to discover this and give him some sort of restitution this week, because that's when we finally found out about it. So he is one of those candidates who has that experience. And again, an openly gay candidate. This roster of candidates is impressively diverse.
Yes.
And I was watching one of the French language debates. Almost all of them can speak French, and some of them, like Annamie Paul, Miriam Haddad, Dimitri Lascaris, speak French very, very well. And yeah, multiple languages as well. So it is an impressive roster of candidates just based on that diversity. And also, some of their lived experiences as well.
Yeah, I think even the ones who aren't yet fully bilingual are very clear that they're studying to be it. I think Andrew West is one. He says he takes like 3 French lessons a week. We were talking about some of the diversity of candidates, David, as well as the first, Amita Kuttner. They would also be the first non-binary leader of a party.
Yes, Kuttner. They would be the first non-binary leader of a political party here in Canada. Courtney hasn't embraced the label, the eco-socialist, but a lot of Courtney's policies, definitely line up with that wing of the party. And like I said, that wing of the party has been organizing and saying, vote for Lascaris, vote for Haddad, and vote for Courtney. So Courtney also wants to see a tax on the super rich, a wealth cap as well. Also some interesting things that I'll quickly mention. Courtney also wants to see the Charter of Rights reformed to include values and rights such as the right to housing, the right to internet access, and that sorts of things. They would also like to see municipalities have constitutional powers, so that would be included within the Constitution. So a lot of interesting things. Yeah, it would take a lot of work to do that. Lowering the voting age to 16, which is already a Green Party policy platform, making Election Day a national holiday, and maybe possibly investigating term limits for MPs. So there's a lot within their platform, which Courtney's platform, that is dedicated to political reform, making sure that more values and more rights of Canadians are protected going forward.
And our producer pulled this fact, which I found fascinating. Kuttner's family in 2005, their home in North Vancouver, was destroyed by a mudslide. Their mom was killed and their father left with lifelong injuries and brain damage. And they say that that's informed their fight for climate action. So certainly some interesting histories. Eric, you touched on Courtney Howard. She comes to us from Yellowknife.
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't know as much about as David does about the candidates, but so, yes, she is a physician from the Northwest Territories. I think that she's spent more of her life in Western Canada. David might have some more on the details of her policy position.
I think she's emergency physician in Yellowknife, and David, clinical associate professor at the University of Calgary. She serves a majority Indigenous community in Canada's Arctic and subarctic. She led policy work for the Lancet Countdown on health and climate change. She's done research on menstrual cups, wildfires, eco-anxiety, and eco-grief. What is her platform like?
And she also lives on a permafrost hill. Most of the north is, you're living on permafrost, but still, she is acutely affected by climate change. And her platform, she's a doctor, embraces the idea that climate change isn't just an environmental and economic issue, it is a health issue, especially in the north where you have, sky-high prices for the cost of food. In her platform, Dr. Howard is saying that, we need to have nutritious, affordable food for all Canadians, so she's addressing food security there. Also, this is something that we see in other parties, and including in the Greens' current platform. Dr. Howard is aggressively pursuing, the idea of universal pharmacare, universal mental health care, universal truly a holistic health approach that is paid for by the federal government, which she argues would result in significant savings to, the Canadian system in the long term. So those are some of the policies and positions that Dr. Howard is putting forward. And I believe, Eric, she's raised...
No, go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, go ahead, Vashi.
No, go ahead.
I believe correct me if I'm wrong, she's raised she's, in terms of fundraising, she has raised the fourth highest amount,
Yep, I think you're right.
Yeah.
Eric?
Yeah. So, Dr. Howard is a contender, certainly, in this race.
Yeah, and I believe if she did win, she would be the first leader from Northern Canada since Audrey McLaughlin of the NDP in the early 90s.
I don't even know how you know
that would be a bit of a shift.
That's fair. I don't even know where that lives in your head, but just another day where I admire that it does. If you are just joining us now, I'm Vashi Kapelos with my colleagues Eric Grenier and David Thurton, and we are here in Ottawa bringing you coverage. David's at the Ottawa Art Gallery, where the next leader of the federal Green Party is set to be announced. We heard from Elizabeth May, who of course resigned in November of 2019. The interim leader, Joanne Roberts, has spoken as well. Soon we are anticipating the announcement will be made. We're told we'll be given a sort of 10-minute warning that it's coming. The announcement of the next leader will be made. The ballots were mostly cast, more than 23,000 of them online, right until 6:30 tonight, which is kind of interesting. There's the podium right there at the Ottawa Art Gallery. There was a mail-in option as well, and I believe the ballots for that closed a little bit, or the sort of deadline for that was a little bit earlier. But as I said, more than 23,000 people, we learned not too long ago, cast their ballots, and that would require 11,000 people to vote for, or 11,000 votes rather, to secure the leadership. There are 8 people in the running, and we've been trying to kind of go through as much of their platforms and who they are as possible. I'll bring back my colleagues, David and Eric. David, I think the one that we haven't touched on yet, we've mentioned him, but we haven't gone through his platform much, is Andrew West, if I'm not wrong. What can you tell us about Mr. West?
So yeah, Wes is an Ottawa boy. He lives here in the city. He practices, I believe, family law and I believe some environmental law. He describes himself as a centrist, but he has made it very clear that he wants to attract disaffected conservative voters. I think the big thing that stands out from his policy platform is he has a very detailed plan to bring about proportional representation in a way that kind of eases Canadians into it, because I think when we talk about proportional representation, we talk about, everyone wants it, but how we do it, the waters kind of get muddy there. So what he is proposing is that the Senate would change. The House of Commons would remain the same. We would elect MPs in the same fashion that we do today, the first past the post system. But the Senate would become an elected chamber, and it would be based on a proportion of the popular votes that we see. So, I'm not an expert on proportional representation, but it was just interesting that out of all the candidates, it wasn't just a line in his platform. He really laid that out. That, and of course, this is the story of the Greens as well, that, they see proportional representation as part of the solution to get more of them into power. So he's really laid that out, which might appeal to a lot of people voting in this election. And
drum roll, breaking news. This is getting very exciting. We've been given the indication that we have between 10 and 12 minutes before they'll come out to reveal the results. So you want to stay tuned for this, because we're going to find out who the new leader of the party is in about 10 minutes time. Eric, in that vein, while we're sort of, I think, in a broader context, trying to set the stage for whomever emerges as the winner, how significant is this for the Green Party? They have truly been led by Elizabeth May for so long and identified as such for so long. How big of a deal is this for the party and sort of where they can position themselves in the larger federal scene?
Yeah, I think for the Greens, it is a really important moment, because they've come a long way since when Elizabeth May first became leader. Back in 2006, the Greens didn't have any seats in the House of Commons. She was able to get into the debates in 2008. That was a big moment. The Greens were able to get just under 7% of the vote in that election. That was their best performance that they've ever had. And she was finally able to win a seat in 2011. Now, when you look at what happened with the Greens at the provincial level, you saw the Greens win a seat in British Columbia in 2013. They were able to increase the representation in BC in 2017 when there was a minority government that was elected. They won a seat in Ontario. They won seats in New Brunswick, multiple seats. And then in 2019, the Greens won the official opposition role in Prince Edward Island. So going into the 2019 federal election, the Greens were in a really strong position. And if you remember, we were talking back then about whether the Greens could actually surpass the New Democrats. The New Democrats were having a lot of trouble under Jagmeet Singh in his first sort of weeks as leader on the campaign trail. But the Greens weren't able to really cash in on that. They did win an extra couple seats, got their vote back up to 6.5%. But we're starting to see that the Greens need something to get them to the next level. In the New Brunswick election that just took place not too long ago, just a few weeks ago, the Greens weren't able to make any subsequent gains. They increased their share of the popular vote by a couple points, but didn't win any extra seats. We're seeing in British Columbia, the BC Greens there, down in the polls, at risk of actually losing some of the seats they won in 2017. So the Greens do need something new. And I think that is really why we're seeing that the discussions that were happening within the candidates has been about the future. And a lot of these candidates are younger and come from communities in Canada that normally don't have that representation. So there is an opportunity here for the Greens to be something different and to get them to the next level that Elizabeth May got them up to here, but they need something different to get to that next level.
I'll just kind of quickly follow up with you, Eric, because it really reminds me of the conversation that we had so many times in the lead up to the last election. And that was on the heels of all that provincial success. There was a ton of momentum going into the last campaign, which feels like 300 years ago was actually only 1 year ago. But there was a built-up set of expectations for the party that I think it's fair to say, even for themselves at the time, they weren't able to meet, right? And so I think you're right to say that that's got to factor into the way in which this race plays out, or the direction in which the party ends up going, like the way the candidates frame that.
Yeah, and the Greens, I think, really were disappointed with that election because they went in with that momentum. There was only, some polls, there was only a point or two separating the Greens from the New Democrats. They had a very bad first week. They were talking about abortion and issues that the Greens just should have stayed away from. And Elizabeth May, I think you could put some of that at her feet. She has not always been very good at message discipline, and she would admit that she just likes being who she is. But we saw it with her speech tonight as well. Not as focused. It allows the Greens to sometimes lose that message discipline that can get them into trouble, and it did in the last election campaign, whereas the New Democrats ran a pretty smooth campaign and were able to recover and ensure that they did not lose their third-party status.
Although we could argue in the same way the Greens went in with heightened expectations, the NDP went in with lower expectations and were able to surpass those expectations, but not they ended up losing seats as well. But that's for another night, whenever the next election is, which could be not that far away, but doesn't seem like it's around the corner. David, I saw you nodding there. I wanted to get you to jump in on that as well, and how you think they do have 3 MPs, certainly, but given their provincial success last year and in the last few years, there were kind of higher expectations than panned out in the last election. And when I know you've been talking to all the candidates, how important is electoral success of the party to them?
Yeah, so, we're talking a lot about policy on this live stream, but, you have a lot of candidates who are talking about, we need to reform the party. We need to reform the way that we fight elections. And David Merner, that candidate out on Vancouver Island, he spoke a lot about that. He said that this party is not ready for prime time. And he should know he's a former Liberal. He saw what, a party with that has that election apparatus that was able to, of course, win election and inform government is able to do. And he said that, when he went over to the Greens, that didn't happen. There were certain ridings that just didn't have that support. So, he has really spoken a lot about the need for early nominations, and not just any old candidate in this race. We need good candidates, not people who are going to, lead us off on a different message on, pro-choice issues and stuff like that. And that kind of thing. He was also saying that, they need message discipline, but it's kind of there's a balance that needs to be maintained here, because one thing that's attractive about the Greens is that they're so accessible, that they don't speak in talking points. And yes, that means that Elizabeth May rambles a lot, but it can get them into trouble. So, there's this conversation that I know will happen immediately within this party. How do we get election ready? And part of that is just, being organized.
Yeah, just if you're joining us now, I'm Vashi Capellos with my colleagues Eric Grenier and David Thurton, and we are covering the Green Party's leadership contest in just a few minutes. Probably, I think now, less than 5 minutes. We're expecting that some of the sort of administrative heads of the party will emerge, and they're going to actually deliver the results tonight. There are 8 candidates in the running, and we've gone through sort of each of them and their policy platforms and sort of where they see the party going in the future. We've also been taking your questions, and you can keep them coming in. You can send them to us on Twitter, on Instagram, Facebook, whatever you want. We are trying to get through as many as possible. Eric, this is kind of an interesting one and speaks to, I think, maybe the potential future positioning of the party and the larger context for the party, no matter who ends up winning tonight. Should the NDP be worried?
I say yes, because the NDP, the last time that they've been having trouble, it was because the Greens were doing well. And when the NDP is doing well, the Greens tend to have more issues. So the New Democrats should be worried in the sense that if the next leader of the Greens is able to galvanize, is able to get some attention away from the New Democrats, then they could be a potential rival for them, because the NDP is always going to be squeezed by the Liberals, and whenever the Liberals are doing well, the New Democrats aren't doing well. And so, if there is a strong Green Party and a Liberal government that is still in a position to win another election, that leaves not a lot of room for the New Democrats. And when you're looking at some of the seats that the Greens would be targeting, a lot of them are on Vancouver Island, where the NDP has a lot of strength. So Green gains in a lot of these areas would come at the expense of the NDP. So out of all the parties, they probably have the most to worry about in terms of who the Greens choose tonight.
Okay, I'm just looking through some of our other questions. David, a lot of questions that I'm getting are focused on like the future of the party, and there are a lot of people I think who aren't necessarily members and are kind of interested in where the party might be heading. I know you fielded some questions about some of the policy sort of overlaps that they have.
Yeah.
But if you were for someone who doesn't normally pay attention to the party but might be interested in voting, what do you think like the quick headlines are for them? Because we're getting a ton of questions from people like that.
So yeah, what are the quick headlines about what this leadership race has been about? Some of the big ideas. Is that the question?
Yeah, exactly.
Essentially. Yeah, okay. Yeah, definitely. Strong action on climate change, which is something that of course we know the Green Party to be, the home for, at least in terms of messaging and policy and stuff like that. But definitely pushing the guaranteed livable income, or whatever you call it, whether it's a guaranteed basic income or universal basic income. Lots of discussion. Lots of candidates proposing that. They are all in agreement that needs to happen. There's some disagreement on how that works, whether it's targeted, whether it's everyone, but we have that from the candidates. What are some of the other issues that we're seeing? There is a debate that's happening about income inequality in this country, and that we have a lot of people, not a lot of people, we have a small fraction of the population that owns or controls a big amount of the wealth. So you have some candidates saying that, we really need to see a cap on wealth. So, believe it or not, there would be no billionaires. You would not be able to earn a certain amount of wealth in this country. At some point, most of it will be taxed away. We're seeing a lot of conversations about the need for diversity and inclusiveness within this party and with Canadian society. So reform of the police service, reform of the justice system. You have candidates like Amita Kootner out in BC. They are proposing that, we need to decolonialize our society completely from the ground, from the bottom and from the top up. So just, some significant changes, but definitely we're seeing from the candidates strong climate policy and a strong push for a guaranteed livable income. And the Greens were the first party, the first mainstream party in this country to push this idea when it probably wasn't the most popular thing, where people just said, what do you mean you're going to give everyone, $2,000 a month? What do you mean you're just going to give people free money? But, I think Canadians have come around to that, with the pandemic, with the record levels of unemployment. And it just speaks, I think, to how innovative this party has been, and why it's so important to watch and to tune in and to pay attention to what's happening into the Greens, because a lot of their ideas end up in a Liberal platform or an NDP platform. So, you could probably make the argument that if you want to see the future of Canadian politics, at least the future of maybe progressive leftist politics in this country, tune into the Greens, tune into tonight, tune into this live stream, Vashi.
Well, I should say that also,
questions.
Yeah, you highlight the basic income, and I think that what's reinvigorated the discussion even outside of this race has certainly been the CERB, right? That not only the pandemic, but the government's response to 100%. It, and the CERB and discussions about whether it should continue, if it does, in what form. And it's underscored a lot of, for a lot of proponents of the universal basic income, it's underscored for them why they advocate for it. Now, it hasn't convinced the government at this juncture. They obviously didn't put it in their throne speech, for example, but I think it is very much informing the policy discussion around that. I want you to know that we are standing by any minute to take you to, if we can show the podium shot, the podium at the Ottawa Art Gallery. There it is. That's where we're anticipating we will hear from the sort of administrative leadership of the Green Party. They'll be there any minute now to announce who the next leader of the party is. 8 candidates in the running, no polling done during the race. So other than some fundraising numbers, we don't have a clear indication of who might walk away tonight. But we do know that there were more than 60% of the membership, the 35,000 people who belong to this party, who hold memberships, cast a ballot. So more than 23,000 people did, which means that they would need more than 11,000 votes. Oh, I see somebody preparing the podium there. It's getting very exciting. So they would need more than 11,000 votes to secure the leadership. Let's just go over a little bit for people who are just joining us, Eric, how this works. It was a combination of online voting, which ended at 6:30, and then you had the option to mail in a ballot too. But you were saying, for example, the number of people who cast a ballot is a lot higher than the last time there was a leadership race, which with the major caveat that that was a while ago.
Yes, well, it was 2006, and yeah, they only had a little over 3,000 votes in that election campaign. Elizabeth May won the leadership against David Chernyshenko back in 2006. Yeah, so what this is, it's a one member, one vote election, which means every single member's vote is equally valuable, unlike we saw in the Conservative or the Liberal leadership races where each riding gets an equal weight, and you need 50%. It's a ranked ballot, which means that if no one gets 50% of the vote on that first ballot, the last place candidate is dropped, and whoever their supporters rank second, they get their vote, and that process continues until someone gets 50%. And when we're looking at a list of 8 candidates, and as you mentioned, we don't have any public polling, and the fundraising does not show an outright front runner. We have every expectation that it won't be a first ballot result. We'll have to wait and see how many ballots it'll take until we have a winner.
And a reminder, David, based on that fundraising information of who the anticipated front runners are, tell us a bit about each of them. You've got Annamie Paul on the one hand, and who came away as like the clear leader when it came to fundraising, and Dimitri Lascaris, who came in second. What do you know about those two individuals? What should our viewers know?
Yes, so yeah, as you said, they are the front runners in terms of fundraising. And we keep saying fundraising because, you know, I haven't seen any credible polling in this race to suggest that, you know, there is a front runner. I do know that there has been some polling done. I don't know how credible it is, like I said, but so really the only indication the only indication we have that they're, you know, which candidate might win this tonight is those fundraising numbers. So Annamie Paul has raised the most. She is a Toronto candidate. She lives in Toronto. She has run for the party and I believe it was in 2019 in Toronto, just one election. She is a black woman hoping to be the first black woman to lead a federal party in this country. We'll see if that happens tonight. her big thing is that, we need to see more diversity within federal policies. We need to see more diversity within the Greens. We need to see more inclusivity. She is for things such as guaranteed livable income. She is for things such as maintaining the strong climate policy that we know that comes from the Greens. So one interesting thing that she is proposing, and Vashi, stop me if I'm going into too much detail, is a carbon border adjustment, which is a carbon tax on imports. Dimitri Lescaris, I should probably talk about him really quickly. Do I have time to talk about Lescaris?
You do, yeah, go for it. We're,
yes,
I think, about 5 minutes away from the announcement of the results.
Okay, so that's plenty time. Lescaris,
don't take it
all
all,
time for
David,
questions. If people have questions, put it in. Yeah, we need time for questions, of course. Lescaris, Montreal candidate. He's a lawyer. He describes himself as a journalist. He has, I believe, he's part owner of the Real News Network. Look it up if people want to know about that. And yeah, Montreal candidate. He has run for the Greens in past elections. He's the former justice critic. Makes sense. He's a lawyer. And he wants to take the Greens further to the left. So he describes himself as an eco-socialist. He wants to see the RCMP defunded. He wants to see the military defunded, or at least the funding significantly reduced. He wants to see Canada out of NATO. He has, a lot of views on Canada's foreign policy in Israel and Venezuela.
Controversial.
I don't know if we have time to go into all of that. He is in, controversial views. Controversial views about what Canada should do with Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou. He believes that Canada needs to let her go and to release her to get the two Michaels back. Views like that. And so he wants to take the party further left to adopt these eco-socialist values. A lot of people within the party kind of think that the party should move in that direction to attract more young voters who just don't want to see climate action, but climate justice. So, as we address the issues with greenhouse gases, we also address the issues of inequality that is being caused by the climate situation in this country.
Right. Okay.
In the world.
Yeah, you didn't take all 5 minutes, but it was a very thorough depiction of both those front runners, and I appreciate you for that. Eric, just as we sort of set the stage again for, we're anticipating now any minute the announcement of the leader, whoever takes over this party, what state are they taking it over in? Like, where does the Green Party sit nationally? What's the state of the party right now? What's your assessment on that?
The party is in a decent position. Their fundraising was not too bad after the last election. They weren't as badly hit, one might say, as some of the other parties in terms of their donations coming in during the pandemic. Their support nationwide in the polls is still at about 6%, so more or less where it was in the last election. Of some concern, I would say, for them is that their support has actually come down quite a bit in British Columbia and Atlantic Canada, the two areas where they actually have MPs. So that is going to be, I would say, job number one for the next leader, is to make sure that they can at least shore up the seats and the areas of the country that they have some representation in. So the party does have an opportunity because it is a minority government. The Liberals, while they're leading in the polls, there's not a huge amount of satisfaction with the direction of the government. So the Greens do have that opportunity, but because of the pandemic, they are having a lot of trouble getting their agenda, into the conversation. A lot of Canadians primarily concerned with the pandemic from a healthcare perspective, but also from an economic perspective. So the climate has dropped. If you think back when Elizabeth May became leader in 2006, the environment was the top issue of Canadians. When we think about the beginning of just this year, in January 2020, the environment was the top issue of Canadians, but it isn't anymore, and it might not be for quite a while, depending on how long the pandemic and the economic recovery after it, how long that is all going to take.
Yeah, in that vein, I found the remarks from, and we aired them just a little bit earlier on the network and on the live stream from Elizabeth May, very interesting. And David, I wonder how you think it might inform the way in which whoever wins this race kind of positions themselves, in that Ms. May's essential point was you can I think she said you can have two front burners, right? Like, you can be worried about the emergency that we're in right now and still want to feverishly address the climate emergency that we are, that we face right now, but that we will face to an even larger degree in the future. Her point was basically, you don't have to take your pedal off the gas on climate change just because there is a pandemic. And I think to Eric's point, it's a little bit hard. It's hard to make that point right now because people are so consumed with the pandemic. I think everyone, of course, cares about climate change, but you know, if you're worried about having a job tomorrow, if you're worried about the pandemic in your health, like it's difficult to juggle those things. So speak a little bit from your perspective about how you anticipate whoever takes that stage in a few minutes will have to kind of address that and lead the party in that vein.
Well, you know, I think, first of all, they're going to have to deal with, you know, they're going to have to unite the party. This hasn't not been a divisive race. Like, you know, there weren't candidates ripping each other apart. But, you know, certainly you do have the party divided along the lines of, you know, the political spectrum. So bringing it together. There are also internal issues within the party involving the executive director, involving a number of issues and the way that, you know, whether or not he should stay on and stuff like that. Ashley Burke, my colleague, has done some great reporting on that, and so, you know, that will be the issue. That will be some of the things that will be on the agenda for day one for this candidate. And then, you know, going out and talking to Canadians and making sure that Canadians get to know them, and advancing those climate issues, but also advancing the issues that Canadians care about and are concerned about, given that we're in a pandemic, given we don't know how long this is going to last, given that we don't know when this recovery is going to happen. So they're going to have to, you know, work those burners at the same time. You know, talking about climate, holding the Liberals, holding whoever's in government accountable to achieving, you know, Canada's climate goals, but at the same time advancing and making sure that Canadians are taken care of, that they have jobs, that they have proper health care and whatnot.
Yeah, I think it's interesting in that vein as well, Eric, and David has talked about this at length tonight, but sort of this division between the candidates of bringing the party more to the so-called left versus keeping it in the center, or at least trying to appeal to a broader swath of Canadians. Depending on who wins tonight, we're going to have, I think, a pretty clear indication of where the membership feels on that. And that is probably pretty instructive for the party, for whoever wins, and will provide a bit of a path out, you know, forward out of this as well.
And as David has mentioned, the party membership really has a very, very important role in deciding party policy. So if the membership does vote for a candidate who wants to bring the Greens further to the left, then that is almost certainly going to be what's in the platform in the next election. If instead they do choose a more centrist, from the perspective of the Green Party, a candidate, then we can expect that the platform will look a lot like the one that we saw in 2019. But it is a calculation for the Greens. And it's the same kind of discussion that we've often seen from the New Democrats, that whether they should be a party of the left, a party that is based primarily on principle, whether or not it's popular, or a party that is trying to increase its appeal, trying to actually vie for power. I'm not sure that there is as much of an electorate for the Greens on that, you know, quote unquote eco-socialist left as there is on a more broader perspective. But for a lot of people who care a lot about these issues, it's not about whether you win. It's about, you know, whether you have policies that you can believe in, you can sleep at night when that's what you're standing for.
Well, it's interesting because it parallels so many of the conversations we had, and I've said this before, but even around the Conservative Party's leadership, right? Like, where does the leader go if they appealed very much to the rightist part of the party? What we saw emerge even when Aaron O'Toole won was an appeal, and one that's been repeated ever since, to try and appeal to a broader swath of Canadians. So that kind of dynamic is interesting. And just quickly to follow up, Eric, I do have a question, and we keep them coming because it looks like they're a little delayed. So we'd love to take your questions on any you know, Twitter, Facebook, whatever it happens to be. I get a lot of questions about the NDP versus the Greens, sort of like how they factor into each other's ether, each other's circles. This person says, I was wondering that if the Greens do go all in on the leftist vote, how could that influence potential vote splitting on that side? We already see the NDP and Liberals splitting each other in some markets. Do you think that this would have any influence, or are the Greens a non-factor because of their small size? What do you think about that, Eric?
Well, no, I think they're definitely a factor. But it is an open question what would happen. If the party went very far to the left, would we see, you know, Democrats who are further to the left, people like Nikki Ashton, for example, and the people who voted for her in the NDP's last leadership race, would they feel that the Greens are actually representing that kind of leftward approach and they should get their support? But then you lose some of those more centrist, more center-left Green voters to the Liberals or the New Democrats who feel like the Greens have gone too far. And I don't know what the answer to that is, to be honest, because we don't really know how the Green voters are really going to feel about this, whether they are primarily on the left or they primarily on the more center left. Because the Greens aren't a huge party in terms of their national support, it is hard to dissect their supporters a bit more than you might be the case for the NDP or the Liberals or the Conservatives. But yeah, for the next leader of the party, the members are going to decide which direction they're going to go, if they have to go very far left or more into the moderate centrist sort of approach in the past. But I think that there is some high risk for both of those approaches. And as I mentioned earlier, if one party really wants to keep an eye on what the Greens are going to do, it is the New Democrats, because when the Greens have had a lot of success, often it's the NDP that pays the price for that.
Okay, just to remind you, this right here, you can go, I'm just playing my best Vanna White right now. This is where we are going to anticipate any minute now. The announcement will be made about who wins the leadership of the Green Party. David, jump in on that, and then I have a follow-up for you.
Yeah, or do you see collaboration between the two parties nationally? There is one candidate
Eric
in this
says
race,
no.
Marion Haddad, who's... Okay, anyways, maybe, there's a lot of bad blood. I've heard a lot of bad talk about the NDP in this race. But, you still have one candidate, Marion Haddad, who's saying, let's work together. She's proposing a one-time alliance between the NDP and the Greens in the next federal election, where they choose which ridings to put candidates in, so they could get more progressives in the House of Commons.
I think that's fascinating. I think that's such an, Eric, it
is.
It's super interesting to talk about. I would literally fall off this chair in shock if the NDP went for it.
And the NDP and the Greens, there's not a lot of love lost between those two. If we think about what's been going on in British Columbia, in the first weeks of the campaign in 2019, Jagmeet Singh and Elizabeth May were not saying very nice things about each other.
No.
And in New Brunswick, there was a lot of issues that happened in New Brunswick where an entire wing of the NDP, the provincial NDP, allegedly crossed the proverbial floor. Neither of them had, the NDP didn't have representation, but there's a lot of bad blood, it seems, between the Greens and the New Democrats, which is not that uncommon, that you see often in the parties that are within the same spectrum, often see a lot of issues with each other rather than, the party that's on the opposite side of the aisle.
Yeah, they were very competitive in the 2019 race. I think it's safe to say. As I mentioned, we're waiting for the announcement at that podium at the Ottawa Art Gallery. That's where the announcement will be made about the new leader, and David Thurton is actually there. I think, David, it would benefit all of us if you could just go over a bit of what this race has been like. It took place essentially through the pandemic. Elizabeth May resigned back in November of 2019 before we knew there would be a pandemic, but the pandemic really affected how this race ended up playing out. Like this was supposed to be happening in PEI, for example, a big event in PEI, and it's not PEI.
Yeah, we were supposed to be having, lobster and oysters and all that wonderful stuff that, Islanders welcome us with.
No, you wouldn't be doing that. You'd be working.
No, well, afterwards, the rewards of a hardworking journalist covering the, a federal party election. Totally. This was supposed to be an on-the-ground campaign. I mean, Andrew West was even thinking, I'm gonna, have a solar-powered or, biodiesel-powered van and travel the country and go out talking to Greens, and my whole campaign was going to be an example of, how to campaign in an environmentally friendly way. Well, that went all out the window when, March happened, we all went into lockdowns and all that stuff started to happen. Candidates quickly had to switch they quickly had to become video producers, getting their web cameras, getting their internets increased so they can, stream live video constantly. I would hate to see some of their internet bills, if they don't have unlimited internet. In fact, one candidate, Courtney Howard in Yellowknife, which has, crazy internet bills, was saying that, her bill was quite high. So yeah, they had to campaign during this pandemic, but in a way that's been a really good thing because, we could be going into an election anytime, Vashi. So there are only really two parties that have campaign experience in a pandemic. That's the Conservatives with their leadership race that just wrapped up electing Erin O'Toole, and now the Greens. So in some sense, they, will be able to hit the ground running if we have to go to the polls. And
okay, wait.
Talk about the issues.
Somebody's walked up to, I think Joanne's walked up. Joanne Roberts has walked up to the podium. Let's listen.
The Leadership Contest Committee has now reviewed and certified the results of the 2020 Green Party Leadership Contest. I have here in my hands the first round results. As Greens, participatory democracy is one of our core values, and it is important that we have transparency in the process and the final result. So to ensure this, we will announce the results for each round in order to show how the leader has been elected by the membership through a ranked ballot. Just a reminder, the votes required to elect are 11,939.
Le comité de la course à la chefferie a révisé
The Leadership Committee has reviewed and validated the results of the Green Party Leadership Contest for 2020. We have the results from the first round, and for the Green Party, openness and transparency is open, so we need to ensure that the final process is transparent. We will be announcing the results one round at a time to indicate how the new leader was elected by the members based on preferential voting. 11,939 votes are needed to win.
First round results. Annamie Paul, 6,242. Dimitri Lascaris, 5,768. Courtney Howard, 3,285. Glenn Murray, 2,745. David Merner, 2,636. Amita Kuttner, 1,468. Miriam Haddad, 1,345. Andrew West, 532 votes. None of these options, 36, none of these options has been eliminated.
Les résultats du deuxième tour.
The results of the second round. Annamie Paul, 6,242. 5,768. Anita Howard, 3,285. David Miller, 2,636. Anita Kuttner, 1,468. Miriam Haddad, 1,345. Andrew West, 532. Andrew West is eliminated.
And now we'll go to the results of the third round. Annamie Paul, 6,305. Dimitri Lascaris, 5,813. Courtney Howard, 3,348. Glenn Murray, 2,821. David Merner, 2,697. Amita Kuttner, 1,486. Miriam Haddad, 1,358. Miriam Haddad has been eliminated. Take a look at the screen when you see how we have laid out the votes. You will see that when someone is eliminated, their votes are redistributed amongst the other candidates based on the ranking that they were given. At the bottom, you will see exhausted votes, or bulletin de vote épuisé. That means that that voter only ranked, in this case, 3 individuals, and they have no other choices, so their ballot no longer is, so it is exhausted, is how it's described. So you will see as we go through the rounds that this is exactly how these votes are being redistributed.
Les résultats du quatrième tour.
Results of the fourth round. Dimitri Lascaris, 6,846.
Courtney Howard,
Annamie Paul, 6,468. Glenn Murray, 2,836. David Merner, 2,737. Anita Kuttner is eliminated.
And now we go to the fifth round. The fifth round, Dimitri Lascaris, 7,050. Annamie Paul, 6,952. Courtney Howard, 3,762. Glenn Murray, 2,992. David Mirner, 2,856. David Mirner has been eliminated. I should remind you, because you may have forgotten, the number of votes required to be elected, 11,939.
Results of the sixth round. Annamie Paul, 7,614. Dimitri Lascaris, 6,551. Courtney Howard, 4,535. Glenn Murray is eliminated.
And now we come to the seventh round. Annamie Paul, 8,862. Dimitri Lascaris, 8,340. Courtney Howard, 5,824. Courtney Howard has been eliminated. I have in my hand the final round. The next leader has been elected by 12,090 votes.
We have the results of the leadership contest. The winner won with 12,090 votes and will be the next leader of the Green Party of Canada.
Please join me in congratulating the next leader of the Green Party of Canada, Annamie Paul.
Over the course of the campaign, we've seen the country and we've seen the world completely upended. As we do come out the other side, and I know that we will come out the other side, we have to talk about now what comes next. How are we going to be more resilient the next time? How are we going to build a more sustainable society? How are we going to build into the system the kind of collaboration and cooperation that helped us avoid the worst during this crisis? And a big part of that to me is going to be about electing more Greens. Because what we're interested in is seeing a green recovery, a recovery that recognizes the limits of our planet's resources, the need for a full social safety net, and that is going to tackle the climate emergency, which is the existential threat of our times. And we can't let the people down because we need to be in the room on their behalf, and that's really what our campaign and what the Green Party is all about.
Please welcome Annamie Paul to the stage.
I come to you this evening from the unceded territories of the Anishinaabe and Algonquin peoples. I say that with a great deal of gratitude, and I say that in the spirit of true allyship. As the descendant of the Black diaspora who has suffered its own history of oppression and colonialism, I will always stand as a strong ally with Indigenous peoples in their calls to action and their calls for justice and the fight for self-determination and sovereignty. Je fais partie de la communauté noire.
I'm part of the Black community, and I am a defender of and in fact, colonialism stole my original voice. I'm an ally, and I support Indigenous leaders when they call for action and when they seek self-determination.
I want to thank Green Party members. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. I know that this was, and we can see from the results, what an incredibly difficult decision this was, how many talented people were in the pool of candidates. We have demonstrated to Canadians what incredible talent the Green Party can attract. And I want to thank every member who placed their faith in me to lead the Green Party of Canada. It is a privilege to be able to represent you, and there is no doubt that I will give my all to that work, because I know, and we know, that people are better off in Canada when there are more Green Party members representing them. So my job is to be your strong voice, carrying that message to the people of Canada and working to get Greens elected. I want to extend my sincere thanks and congratulations to the other candidates who ran in this race. It was 9 months. We gave it our all. We gave so much of ourselves because we believe in the party. We believe in the future of the Green Party, and we laid it all on the line. I know that we all did. And so I want to congratulate them and their teams and let them know that, from my part, their sacrifice has been appreciated and recognized, and that there is a role for them in the Green Party of Canada. I hope that they will join me in building this next phase in the Green Party of Canada's life. And I want to thank my family. This is my husband, Mark, my son, Malachi. My other son, Jonas, is on the phone because he is away at school, but he's here, technology. And I want to thank them so much. There is no one that can go through the bruising, brutal, exhausting sport, blood sport, that is politics, without the support of their family. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart. My sister Ngozi Paul is here, Michael Paul is here, my brother-in-law Evan is here as well. I thank you all so much for every single thing that you did for me and with me and on behalf of me and our campaign for all of these months. Tonight, we have to recognize that this is an historic moment. We, as Greens, yet again, once again, are leading the way. We have done something that has never been done before in Canadian politics, and I congratulate us. I say this, and I thank the Green Party, and I also acknowledge all of the shoulders of the people that I stand upon tonight. I stand upon the shoulders of Elizabeth May, Alexa McDonough, Audrey McLaughlin, and Kim Campbell. I stand on the shoulders of Jean Augustine, David Lewis, Rosemary Brown, and Viola Desmond, and all of the people who opened the door so that one day I could walk through it. Thank you. And tonight, I thank most of all our volunteers. I thank them for believing that something that had never been done in the history of Canada could be done and would be done. Alors, je prends le relais.
So I am taking up the torch for women like, and I'm taking it from all these women who opened the door to women such as me. I am taking it up from Rosemary Brown, Jane Augustine, and tonight, in particular, I am taking up the torch from every volunteer that contributed to our campaign, all of those who believed that something that had never happened before, that had never been done, could be accomplished, and I want to thank them for that.
The big gaping hole for me tonight in this celebration is my mother's absence. My mother is 84 years old, and she believes in Canada. She believes in Canada, and if I'm speaking French that people understand, it's because my mother was determined that her children would be bilingual. My mother is not here tonight because she is 84 years old and we are in the midst of a pandemic. But when my mother came to North America in the 1960s, she came at a time when many states and many parts of this continent were still segregated. And I know that at the moment when she was deciding whether to take that bus for the March on Washington, that she never imagined one day her daughter would be elected to lead a national party in Canada. And so I think of my mother tonight and I thank her, and I realize that this terrible, terrible pandemic is the thing that has kept us apart.
Today, I'm thinking of my mother, who is 84, and her arrival in North America. At the time, racial segregation still existed in many American states. She would never have imagined that one day her daughter would lead a national political party. We are separated tonight because of the pandemic, a pandemic that has exacted a huge price from each and every one of us.
And as we think about the pandemic, I think about my father. My father died at the end of May. He died from the neglect that has caused thousands of people to die in our long-term care facilities. He died of an avoidable infection. And on the day that he died, my sister called me. My sister called me in tears, and she said to me, "We have got to do better than this, Annamie. We have got to do better than this. We have got to know what a life is worth." And so that is the question as we face down this pandemic, as we face down the climate emergency, that we must constantly ask ourselves, what is a life worth? This is the question we must answer. Que vaut une vie?
What is a life worth? As we are facing unprecedented challenges like the pandemic and the climate crisis, here is the question that we must keep in mind. What is a life worth?
There is no question that we are facing the two defining challenges of our time. How will we build a complete social safety net that allows every person in Canada to live in dignity and security? And how will we tackle the existential crisis of our time, which is the climate emergency? When I think about the social safety net, again, I think about my father, but I also think about every single student that is not going to be able to go back to school this year because they didn't get the jobs they needed this summer and because the government didn't provide them with universal post-secondary education. When I think about the climate emergency, for instance, I think about the people who have to decide whether they need to leave their homes because the insurance will no longer cover them because they live on a floodplain that is being ravaged by extreme weather events. I think of the fires that seared the throats of many of our team members in British Columbia out west just a couple of weeks ago. And I think of my brother Michael, who until recently was a worker in Alberta's oil patch and working as a roughneck, and all of the members of his crew who are tired of the boom and bust cycle that has associated itself with our continuous thirst for fossil fuel extraction and his desire to have a job with a real future. So when I think about these big challenges, I think also about the other parties. And what I realize, and what many of us have come to realize during this period, is that the other parties are simply out of ideas. They are intellectually exhausted, and they are out of ideas. This is a moment that demands daring, courageous leadership. And this is something that we simply did not see in the last speech from the throne. Again, this is a government that is intellectually exhausted. Alors que la situation exige une leadership politique,
the situation requires bold leadership, courageous leadership, I have to admit that the other political parties have no more original ideas. I listened to the speech from the throne, hoping to be inspired. Unfortunately, I only heard empty words from a government that is intellectually exhausted.
You have matched a leader to the challenges of this time. I also believe that we need to match a party to the needs of this moment. And there is no question that that party is the Green Party of Canada. We are the party for this moment. And when you look at our policies, the ones that we were championing, all on our own, voices in the void, in the dark, when other parties simply did not want to hear, did not want to talk about them, the flames that we kept burning all along, whether we are talking about long-term care reform, universal pharmacare, a guaranteed livable income, the Green Party blazes the paths that other parties follow. And this is the moment where this kind of innovative, evidence-based, daring, political policy thinking is absolutely necessary. When we look at the climate emergency, we must acknowledge that the Green Party remains the only party that has a target and a plan that corresponds with the science and can get us to where we need to be to save the future of our planet. And we have a good news story. This is a good news story. This is a story that the Green Party is going to fan out, and I will fan out to share with people in Canada. This is the chance of a lifetime for us to move towards a more just, a more resilient society on behalf of people in Canada and behalf of people around the world, and we believe that it can be done. So as we look at the ways that we intend to spend the historic amounts of money that will accompany the stimulus that we are going to need to have to repair the economic and social damage of the pandemic, the government needs to be investing in a green transition. A transition that represents the most extraordinary economic opportunity that we have ever seen, and that will set us on a path for the future and set us up for the future. I say to people in Canada that ultimately the choice is yours, because if we want different outcomes, then we need to make different choices. That begins with our choice in political leadership. And it starts right here, right now. I am running in Toronto Centre in the October by-election. And let me tell you why, okay? I was born in Toronto Centre. My mother taught in the schools in Toronto Centre. My grandmother worked as a frontline service worker in the hospitals of Toronto Centre and broke her back doing it in the process. I will not abandon the residents of Toronto Centre to a Liberal Party that has neglected that constituency, that riding, for the last 27 years. I have had enough of candidates being parachuted into that riding and then taking the next train out of town until the next election comes around. This is a riding that is in need of real help now. It is the center of the opioid crisis. It is one of the least affordable ridings in the entire country. It has one of the highest child poverty rates in the entire country. It is the center of the urban Indigenous population in Toronto. And I say on behalf of residents of Toronto Centre, enough, enough. And so I call upon every single person in Canada, and not just Green Party members, who are tired of that cycle and who believe that their neighbors and their friends and their fellow Canadians that live in Toronto Centre deserve real representation. I call on them to join me and join us as we fight to win that seat and to give them that real representation. Alors, à toutes les personnes
to all of those people who are no longer interested in politics because they don't feel represented, I say, make our party your home. To all those people who are worried about the future of their children and want real action to tackle the climate crisis, I say, come and join us. To all those people who understand that we are going down the same old path by the same old parties, if you are willing to take a different path for a better future, I say welcome.
I say tonight to every person in Canada that has tuned out of politics because they didn't see themselves reflected, I say, make your home with us. To every person that is worried about the future of their children or their communities and want to see real action on the climate crisis, I say, join us. To every person that understands that we are being led down the same old road by the same old parties to the same old destination, I say, if you are ready to strike out on a new path toward a better and brighter future, welcome, and thank you.
Okay, that is the victory speech from the new leader of the Green Party, and you can see her right there, Annamie Paul.
To supporting you in Toronto Centre.
let's
supporting
listen
you in your role
to a
as
second to the leadership of the
being
party,
part of the
administrative
excitement
leadership.
that your sister represents. If she comes to every rally, we're a shoo-in. I love that energy. Right now, we are going to give the media a chance to ask a few questions of our new leader, newly minted leader, and yeah, if you guys want to have a seat for a minute and watch her in action, here we go. Rosie Emery, you have the questions, and one question, one follow-up. Yeah.
Okay. Bon, on a Laurence Martin de Radio-Canada. En effet, elle a deux questions parce qu'elle est la seule francophone.
There are two questions from Radio-Canada.
Bonjour Laurence. Merci beaucoup.
Congratulations. Now, you want the Green Party to win more seats, but what exactly will your strategy be to accomplish that? Because there are a lot of Canadians that see the Green Party as a sympathetic party, but not necessarily a well-organized or professional party. How will you be able to convince a lot more Canadians to vote for you? Well, first of all, we have presented ourselves as a serious and professional party, and that's what we must do. We are in an unprecedented time as a party right now, and in an unprecedented time, you need a party that has innovative ideas. My goal as leader of the Green Party is to really convince Canadians of everything I've just said, that we, in fact, are the ones that have brought forward the best ideas and policies to create a resilient society. We are the party that has always introduced the best policies to fight the climate crisis, which remains the existential crisis of our generations. So in the coming days and months and weeks, what we want to do is make that connection, the connection between our policies and people's needs in Canada. The Green Party here and around the world has always made great breakthroughs in times such as this one. In the kind of times we're living in today. So it's up to us to say to Canadians, you just need a little bit more courage, the courage to choose something different. And if people in Canada are prepared to do that, immediately they will realize that we are a party to build for them where there is a huge amount of talent. Now, myself, like many Greens, we have been associated with other political parties, but we chose the Green Party for a reason, because it offers the best policies for Canadians in Canada. Will you develop a particular strategy to win seats in Quebec? Well, first of all, I want to say hello and thank you to our members in Quebec and to the people of Quebec. We are a national party. A national party needs to win seats right across the country, and particularly in Quebec. In fact, I was visiting Quebec a few weeks ago, but the fact is that the pandemic changed everything all of a sudden. So it is my plan to spend a great deal of time there and to speak to Quebecers about the reasons why they can find a home in our party. Quebecers are very, very progressive. The people of Quebec want a real plan to tackle the climate crisis, and the Green Party is the one offering that. They want a real plan to develop and solidify our social safety net, and that's what the Green Party is offering. So I hope that with my Anglophone French, they will understand that I am someone who really wants to unite people and bring them into the Green Party, and I want to say that my two children, Malachi and Jonas, will are part of the francophonie. It's very important for me as a mother that they be francophone as well. They studied in the French speaking system, and I really feel very strongly about that association with the francophonie. And a final question. There are a number of candidates who were saying they were eco-socialists, but they did not win. What kind of place will you give them within the party? What kind of role will they have? Well, all the Greens, I mean, we are part of a global movement, and we have values that we share. And I know that every candidate that participated in the contest shares those values. So every member and every candidate defends those values and wants to participate in the future of our party will be welcome. I also want to underscore that the Green Party is a very democratic party. It's based on the policies developed by our members that come from the grassroots. So it's always more complicated, of course, than the model used in other parties, where the power is concentrated in the leader and his small entourage. So yes, it is more complicated, more difficult, and there will be issues at times, but ultimately that is how you develop better policies. That's how you develop truly innovative policies, because diverse representation is very important, and the Green Party is really the place for anyone that understands that. Thank you, Laurence.
Thank you. Next question comes from David Thurton, CBC. One question, one follow-up.
Hey, congratulations.
Thank you, David.
So the first question I just asked you is, you know, a number of people in this election, Paul, have supported eco-socialist candidates. How are you going to respond to that loud call within this election that people want to see strong leftist policies in your party now?
If people want to see strong progressive politics, politique, c'est français, policies in our party, then they just have to look at our electoral program from 2019, okay? We were talking about a guaranteed livable income while it was still just a twinkle in the eye of the other parties. We've been talking about universal pharmacare for years. We have been talking about a just transition for workers in the extractive industries. We've been talking about universal post-secondary education. We've been talking about a safe supply of drugs in order to combat the opioid epidemic. We have consistently been at the forefront of progressive policies in this country. And I will tell you for my part, and I believe that most Canadians would feel the same way, that if even a fraction of the policies that we have been fighting for all these years had in fact been implemented before this pandemic hit, we would have been in a very different situation. We would have been much more resilient. And so I say to any progressive person who is looking for the most progressive party in Canadian politics, that is the Green Party of Canada. It's obvious. You know, again, and as I said to Laurence, I'll say in English, every Green Party member had the opportunity to join another party. This party has been around since the 80s, but it hasn't been around forever. And most of us either came to the Green Party as a first-time member, or as someone who came from another political party. This is a conscious, intentional choice of very bright and accomplished people. And I'm talking about physicists and jurists and engineers and, you know, all the kind of people who participated and worked on our campaign. We are here because we believe that the Green Party offers the best, most evidence-informed policies in Canada.
We've done some reporting at CBC News about the internal issues within your party. Are you going to keep your executive director?
That is absolutely not my decision. And I would encourage and welcome the media's education about the differences between the Green Party of Canada and the other major political parties. The Green Party is a member-based party. Our policies come from our membership. They are not top-down policies that are imposed by the leader of the party. I am here to be a spokesperson for what I believe are the most progressive, most impactful policies in Canada, and those are the policies of our members. And so in terms of the rest, in terms of the governance structure, we have a federal council, which I will be a part of, but just one vote on that federal council. And so those kind of decisions that we're accustomed to being jammed down the throats of membership in other parties, I don't have any authority to do that.
A question.
And I'm happy that that's the case.
Going to pull away from this right now. That is Annamie Paul. She is the new leader, newly minted leader of the Federal Green Party. You heard my colleague David Thurton there asking a question. He's going to run back, I think, to his position. I'm Vashi Kapelos, and we have been covering all evening the race to replace Elizabeth May. My colleague Eric Grenier. I'll pull another Vanna White. There he is at the bottom of your screen. A couple of things, Eric, before I get into some analysis that I'm hoping to get from you that really stuck out for me from Ms. Paul's remarks, initial remarks, and then her Q&A. First of all, there's David. He's getting into place. First of all, her personal experiences, the way in which she talked about her parents and her family, and I think that is significant mostly because this is Canada's introduction to her. For those of us who are watching closely, it's one thing. For many Canadians who perhaps aren't very familiar with the race right now, this will be their introduction to the new leader. And I thought that certainly, you know, she is the first Black woman to lead a federal party, and she talked about the people who had opened the doors, and her mother and her father and her children and her husband. And so I thought it was a very good way to kind of get to know who she is and where she comes from. And then the second thing that really struck me, and this is where I'll get you to weigh in, is around that appeal that she made near the end of her remarks to people who are disenchanted with the system as it exists, with politics as it stands, or just simply are not inclined to vote. And her message was, take another look kind of at this party, at me, and you know, I'm paraphrasing here, but basically insinuating that she hopes to encourage them to do otherwise. And I think that was sort of, for me, what grounded the speech. What stood out to you, Eric? And tell me a bit about those numbers, because it was the 8th round.
Winner, and I agree that her biography really is quite different than you know, most of the other federal leaders. As you said, the first Black leader of a major federal party. She's the first Jewish leader of a federal party since David Lewis in the 1970s. Yeah. So those are remarkable things on their own, right? And as you said, the Greens trying to reach out really across the spectrum to people who are disenchanted from politics, people who are disappointed with the other parties, really, you know, the bread and butter for the Greens in the past, and really what has been successful for them in some of these provincial elections. And to the numbers, you know, it turned out to be a pretty close vote. If you go back to the end, it was she won, I think, with 54.5% of the ballots on that last round. And, you know, she did get a lot of support from those candidates we had talked about being maybe more of the moderate ones, whereas Dimitri Lascaris, the only candidate where he got the most votes from, more than anyone else, was Mariam Haddad, who was also seen as being, you know, further on the left as one of these eco-socialists, as she was calling herself. So, you know, she won by getting that mainstream, more center-left portion of the party behind her. And I think that she, you know, she comes across as a very different candidate, a very new voice on the federal stage. So I think that the other parties are going to be very curious to see how she'll be. And we saw, you know, let's you know, a much more polished speech than, let's admit it, we saw from Elizabeth May earlier on. And she speaks French. You know, she gives the Greens a number of new things to work with. It'll be interesting to see how it works out for her.
Yeah, it's interesting because I have various texts from the parties who are all kind of taking note of that speech and universally pretty impressed by it, and at the same time, some of them more nervous maybe than others. David, do you hear me, or have you got us?
Yeah, I got you.
Okay, great. So tell me a bit about what you take away from this win. Like Eric said, the fundraising ended up being pretty predictive. You had called it, and Eric had too, that the two frontrunners would be Annamie Paul as well as Dimitri Lascaris, and certainly the results bore that out.
So, you know, I'm just struck by how much votes Lascaris got. Like, I don't have it on my notes, my paper that I wrote it down is somewhere else, but Eric could help me with this. About 10,000, I believe. Annamie got 12,000, roughly around there. So, you know, a considerable amount of votes went to the leftist wing of this party, the Ecosocialist. And I asked Paul about that when she was doing her Q&A with reporters in the room there. And she didn't really have a real answer how she's going to reach out to to that wing of the party that wanted to see another leader. Other than that, you know, the Greens already have these, you know, progressive policies, and if Canadians want progressive politics in Canada, look to the Greens. But and I think that wing of the party is probably going to be looking to that tonight. And in fact, I know that. And one of them texted me before the results and just said, you know, if their candidate does not win, they are going to feel like leaving this party. So, you know, I was struck by that, and I didn't listen to the whole speech because I had to follow radio, but, you know, there wasn't really that outreach, at least in my question, to that wing of the party where a significant amount of votes went to.
Yeah, I mean, her point, and she answered it to your question and also in French to our colleagues at Radio Canada, but Eric, she seemed to say like the policies of this party are very progressive. So if you are looking for something that is extremely progressive, you can find a home here. But she didn't make a very specific appeal, for example, to the supporters, although she did, you know, offer her congratulations and kind words to those who ran against her. She didn't specifically say to those who supported Mr. Lascaris, here's what I'm going to do to appeal to you or to try and address some of your concerns. But you know, my guess is that ends up being some of the questions she starts fielding. I mean, David had talked about it earlier. Unity, you know, party unity is always a thing for whoever the new leader of a political party is.
Yeah, and let's be clear. She is still a progressive candidate, right? And her policies are still on that side of the spectrum. Some members wanted to go much further than that, but she does seem to be clearly trying to position the party in, let's say, a more electorally promising position, trying to appeal to a broader swath of the electorate. While there is certainly a significant portion of the population, not I would say big enough to win an election, but a big portion of the population that wants to see much more progressive, much more left-wing policies. You know, there is a lot more voters where Annamie Paul seems to want to place the Green Party. So I think that is probably you know, a more electorally smart position to put herself in. And when you look at where she got support from the other candidates on the ballot, that is where her backers want her to be. So, but as you mentioned, after a leadership race, you know, there's always some hurt feelings. And we'll have to see if this party is going to unify behind her, or if some of these people will be disgruntled, as David said, and maybe decide that they want to leave.
And I was just quickly going to say, before we say goodbye, when is the by-election in Toronto Centre? Because things are going to keep being excited. End of October?
October 26th, and yeah, Toronto Centre and York Centre, and Annamie Paul is going to be the Green Party candidate and a leader on the ballot. We'll see what happens. You never know when there's a leader on the ballot.
I feel like that makes things very exciting. So we have a lot more to look forward to. Guys, I want to thank you both so much. David, I know you ran between all your various duties tonight. And Eric, as always, for you know, providing the context we all need. Oh boy, what just happened? Oh my goodness. That is a frightening sight. It's just basically a repeat of myself. Oh my goodness, the viewers just, there was a mass exodus of them. I want to thank both of you. I would normally feel much more guilty about taking so much of your time on a Saturday night, but it's a pandemic, so we'd all just be sitting at home anyway, right? Thanks to my colleagues Eric Grenier and, as he admits, yes, and David Thurton. Really appreciate your insights and your analysis tonight. And I want to thank all of you for joining us, everyone in the control room for doing a fabulous job tonight, and all of you for also sending in your questions. They were excellent. I really appreciate you spending some time with us this evening. And we will have a lot more of reaction, including an interview with the new leader of the Green Party on Monday's Power Panel, 5 o'clock Eastern. Hope you can join us then.